In a town where even grief had grown quiet, a single bark echoed across the snowy fields, sharp, sudden, and strange. No one saw where it came from, but someone felt it. A little boy tugged his mother's hand and whispered, "He's here." That night, a German shepherd stood at the edge of Ivy's property, mud on his fur, a scar above his eye, and something in the way he watched like he already knew the layout of the house, the habits of the people, the shadows they tried to forget. He never begged for food, never sought affection. He was just there, waiting, watching, and when trouble came, because it always does, he was the first to move. This is the story of a dog with no past, and a girl with too much of one, of crimes long buried, hearts cracked open, and the way healing sometimes arrives in silence, wearing fur and carrying memory like armor. You think you've heard stories about loyal dogs before, but you haven't met Ghost. The snowfall in Winterdale had come heavier than expected, the kind that silenced everything except memory. By dawn, the world had turned to white rooftops, bowed under weight, roads glazed over, and the pine-lined edges of town disappeared into a curtain of snowflakes. Deputy Daniel Reyes, 32, leaned on the hood of his cruiser, scribbling into a small notepad. He was dressed for the weather fleece-lined jacket zipped to the chin, gloved hands steady despite the cold. The radio on his shoulder crackled faintly. Nothing urgent, just static and a dispatch update from Main Street. He was parked at the edge of Willow Creek Road, where the old Hollow Timber Company once stood. The warehouse loomed ahead like a relic from a forgotten time, red brick, boarded windows, roof sagging in grief. No official calls had sent him here, just a hunch. A pause in the air, a small pattern in reports, broken fences, noises at night, and then nothing. He stepped out of the cruiser, snow crunching beneath his boots, and ran a hand over his beard. In the pale morning light, his breath curled like smoke. He clicked his flashlight on and began walking toward the fence line. Behind him, the cruiser idled, its taillights blinking red through falling snow. 5 minutes later, Daniel Reyes vanished. Back at the Winterdale Police Department, Sheriff Eli Morgan leaned over the report with tired eyes. 62, former State Trooper Morgan had spent a lifetime listening more than talking. His silver hair was still full, but the creases around his mouth had deepened over the years, not from anger, but from concern that never fully left. Across from him, Sergeant Mara Chen flipped through dispatch logs. Last contact was 10:53 p.m. He said he was checking out an abandoned structure on Willow Creek. Never called in again. No calls, no body, no cruiser, Eli murmured. Just gone. Mara hesitated. We could go public with it. Alert the state. Push it to media. No, Eli said quietly, his voice like gravel wrapped in snow. Not yet. No panic. Not until we're sure. He stood slowly, as if the weight of the decision settled in his knees. Put together a small unit. Quiet. I want eyes on the yard by sunrise. We'll keep it internal. Mara nodded, concern flaring in her eyes. You think he just walked off? No, the sheriff replied. I think something took him. M's place. Later that night, under a sky thick with clouds and silence, the cruiser was found. It sat like a ghost beside the tree line, door cracked open, engine dead. No sign of struggle, no prints, just snow. The radio was still humming static. A thermos of coffee had spilled over the passenger seat. On the dash sat Daniel's notebook, the pen still clipped to its spine. Inside the warehouse, no one spoke, but someone listened. The snow was different up here. Softer, quieter. It swallowed sound and memory alike, until the world became a breathless blur of white and shadow. Nothing moved, except him. Ghost didn't leave paw prints the way other dogs did. His gait was low, cautious, more like a wolf's than a shepherd's. Each step was a decision, each breath a calculation. He had no collar, no leash, no name, save for the one whispered once long ago by hands that no longer touched him. He was lean ribs visible beneath a coat gone rough with time, healed over scars like branching rivers beneath fur. One ear stood up, the other half torn from something or someone. His eyes, deep set and amber, did not blink much. They simply watched, always watching. Across the still expanse near the freight yard, Ghost moved with the wind at his side, not toward anything, only away. He hadn't eaten in 2 days, but hunger no longer clawed the way it used to. He'd learned to survive on less. Bits of garbage behind old gas stations, the frozen remains of what drivers hit and didn't stop for. He didn't beg, didn't bark. He never drew attention. People made him flinch. He'd learned that, too. That morning, just before dawn broke, Ghost had circled the edge of town, far enough not to be noticed, close enough to watch. A human might call it haunting, the way he hovered a silhouette in the snowbanks, vanishing when you looked twice. But Ghost wasn't a ghost. He remembered, and memory was a heavier thing than the snow. Up on a ridge just west of Willow Creek, he paused, head tilted, nose lifted to the air. There it was, the scent again. Oil, leather, sweat, the faint tang of gunmetal. It was old, days, maybe, but familiar. Not familiar like family, familiar like before. Ghost turned, following the scent downhill. His paws broke through a thin crust of ice. Silent and sharp, he moved past the skeleton of a snow-covered fence and into the bones of what used to be a loading dock. The structure groaned in the wind, boards loose like broken teeth. He didn't hesitate. Under the lean-to, in the shadows where the snow didn't reach, he found it. A footprint. Big, deep, human, still holding its shape. Barely. A few others around it staggered, then nothing. Ghost sniffed, once, then again. The scent was there and gone. He stepped back and sat, still and alert. It was something he used to do in another life. Locate, pause, assess. His ears twitched, his breathing slowed. The air shifted, and his head turned sharply to the left. A sound faint, mechanical, the soft click of a closing door maybe. He knew that sound. Hours passed. Ghost did not leave the yard. Instead, he circled its perimeter twice before settling beneath the rusted frame of an abandoned truck. It was shelter enough for the night. Curled beneath the steel, he shivered, but not from cold. Snow clung to his side like guilt. When the wind blew just right, it carried things he didn't want to remember, like fire and screaming, and her voice. Elena. Sergeant Elena Moore. He hadn't heard that name in years. But it hadn't left him. It was sewn into the fibers of who he was, deeper than scars, heavier than the harness he once wore. She was the one who had first called him Ghost. "Because you move like you've already seen the other side," she'd said, brushing her fingers over his ear. "And you keep coming back?" She used to laugh when she said that, but only when they were alone. That laugh, short, quiet, like an apology, had been the first sound he ever trusted. He'd protected her for 5 tours. Iraq, Somalia, that mission in Belarus that wasn't in any file. She'd held his head once when shrapnel sliced his leg, stitched him up with her own trembling hands, whispering, "You're the only one I can count on out here." And he believed her. Until the fire. Until the convoy exploded, and everything turned to red and dirt and ash. He remembered Elena's hand reaching through smoke. Then nothing. He shifted beneath the truck. From a fold beneath his chest, Ghost nosed at something he kept hidden, wrapped in a torn fragment of tarp, sealed in instinct. He nudged it out into the moonlight. It was the corner of a photograph. Burnt. The image half gone. But part of her face remained. Just enough to remember soft eyes, short, dark hair under a helmet, her arm draped over him. She was laughing. Ghost lowered his head, resting it beside the photo. He did not close his eyes. He never truly slept anymore. Because in sleep, she burned again. And in waking, she never came. Down in the valley, the wind carried another scent, now fainter, but newer. Something had changed. A shift in air. A disturbance. Someone else was looking for something. Ghost didn't know it yet. But the next scent he picked up would not be from the past. It would belong to a boy with quiet eyes and a tremble in his hands. And that boy would not be afraid of him. Not yet. Cold. It was the first thing Daniel Reyes felt when consciousness returned, a damp, bone-deep chill that clung to his skin like rot. His body ached, wrists rubbed raw from coarse rope, lips cracked, a rancid cloth gag pressed against his mouth, soaked with saliva and something metallic, blood maybe. A strip of thick fabric covered his eyes. Darkness bled into every corner of his senses. He didn't know how long he'd been here. He tried to count the hours once, maybe days, but the cold played tricks on his mind, and the silence, broken only by distant drips and the occasional scurrying of rats, had long since gnawed away at his sense of time. Then came the footsteps. Not boots, not heels, just the soft, measured shuffle of someone who didn't need to hurry, someone who already knew the end of this story. Daniel stiffened as the air shifted. The presence entered like a shadow, folding into the room, calm, unhurried. "You're awake again," the voice said, male but hushed and eerily neutral. "Good." Daniel tried to speak, but the gag turned his words into a wet grunt. The rope around his chest dug into his ribs as he strained. "I told you," the man continued, pulling a chair across the cracked cement with a scraping whine. "You'll get answers, just not yet." A flicker of warmth touched Daniel's skin. A space heater? No, too faint. Probably just the man leaning close. He smelled like old cologne, cigarettes, and something Daniel couldn't place like rust. "You don't remember me, but I remember you. All of you. And what you did, M." The words came slowly, not with anger, but with a kind of surgical precision, as if each syllable had been rehearsed 100 times in front of a mirror. "I was collateral," he whispered. "A name on a wrong report. And you, Daniel Reyes, signed off without blinking." Daniel's heart pounded. He could hear it. "Could the man?" "You wrote it off. Another oversight. Another life crushed beneath the weight of what you call justice." A bitter chuckle. "Well, now it's your turn to wait, and wonder, and rot." There was the sound of a zipper, something being set down, a plastic bag, tools. Then silence again. Heavy silence. Daniel strained his ears, but the man was gone. And for the first time since he'd woken up in this underground tomb, something else broke the void. A sound, small, muffled, a whimper. Daniel froze. That wasn't human. He held his breath. Then faint, distant, and low came a growl, a sound both feral and familiar, like an echo from an older life. He had worked with K9 units before. He knew what a German shepherd's growl sounded like, knew the cadence, the vibration, the warning in it. But he couldn't trust his senses. His brain was fogged, starving for water and light. He tilted his head, listened harder. Another sound, not the growl this time. It was the soft scrape of claws against concrete. Hesitant, searching. A moment later, the same growl again, deeper, more urgent. Daniel's pulse surged. He had no reason to hope, and yet something in him stirred, primal and fierce. That wasn't the sound of a rat. That was the sound of instinct on 4 legs. Was it real? Or the hallucination of a brain fraying at the edges? Then a new noise, distant but distinct. A low, deliberate thump, like a weight, hitting wood. Then a pause. Then again, louder. Was it upstairs? Someone or something was trying to get in. Daniel strained, turning his head toward the sound, even though the blindfold left him in blackness. His ears sharpened, desperate to grasp direction, distance, meaning. He dared not call out. But his breath grew shallow, chest tightening with each new thud. Then silence again. Long. Long enough to make him doubt what he'd heard, until crack. The unmistakable sound of splintering wood, fast, brutal, followed by another growl, closer now, echoing off the stairwell. Daniel's heart threatened to crack his ribs. Was someone coming to finish the job, or could it be? The growl rose to a short bark, low, controlled, a command, a ghost from memory. Then came the sound of claws again, faster now. Then sniffing, pacing. Daniel wanted to scream for help, but the gag held him in place like a buried secret. The pacing stopped right outside the door. A moment of absolute stillness, and then a single paw scratch. Then another, deliberate, purposeful, followed by a sharp, frustrated huff. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut behind the cloth, lips trembling. He didn't know who was out there, man or beast, savior or stranger, but something knew he was here, and something wanted him out. The snow had long stopped falling, but its silence still smothered the world. Ghost stood motionless near the edge of the abandoned warehouse, his breath fogging in the brittle morning air. His dark coat, marred with old scars and frost clumps, made him almost invisible against the soot-streaked wall. His ears flicked, nose lifted. There it was again, faint but unmistakable. Blood. Not the sharp, coppery stench of death, but the raw, living kind. Warm. Human. He shifted his weight, paws crunching on frozen gravel as he crept closer. A broken vent window just above the foundation line exhaled a stale draft, and with it, the scent intensified blood, sweat, fear. Ghost posed. One paw hovered mid-step. Something deep inside stirred. Not hunger, not fear. Something older. Memory. A command barked under desert sun. Seek! A hand on his flank, warm, calloused, steady. Good boy, Ghost. That's my soldier. Elena. Her name flickered like static across his fractured mind. The face wasn't always clear, but the feeling was. Loyalty. He inched toward the vent, lifting his head. A whimper bled through the bricks so faint it could have been the wind. But Ghost knew better. That was human. Injured. Male. Muffled. Alive. His heart thudded once. Hard. Then the fog came again. That thick gray drift of instinct and memory, where command blurred into trauma, where the urge to run and the duty to stay collided like a storm behind his ribs. He growled low, not at anything out there, but inside himself. A snarl to anchor his mind, to keep the haze at bay. His claws scraped the stone lip beneath the vent. He stood on hind legs, snout pushing through the opening. Darkness, cement, cold. And that scent again, blood, old sweat, metal, desperation. He barked once, a sharp, clipped sound. Testing, no reply. Just the same low whimper. He tried to squeeze through, but his shoulders hit the iron frame, too narrow. Another growl, this one from frustration. He backed away, circled, then charged, lunging toward the vent in a surge of momentum. His body struck hard against the opening, claws dragging on metal. Too tight. He fell back, panting. For a long second, Ghost stood frozen, eyes darting to the empty street behind him. He could leave. That was the rule. Now avoid, survive. No humans, no commands. But some part of him refused. He had heard a voice, not a word but a need, and he had been trained for need. He looked one last time at the vent, then turned, paws kicking up slush as he broke into a run. Back into town, back toward the scent of people, toward the one thing he had avoided for over a year. He moved like a shadow, slipping between alleys, sticking to fences, always circling wide from the roads. The sun had broken the horizon, but the town remained cloaked in that gray-blue hour when the world still held its breath. He paused at the edge of the fire station. Ghost didn't like the place. Too much noise, too many scents, and worse uniforms. They used to mean camaraderie, purpose. Now they meant danger. He crouched low under a rusted dumpster, ears twitching. Two paramedics sipped coffee near the back entrance, their voices soft. Laughter. One tossed a pastry wrapper to the ground. Another scent hit him antiseptic. Bandages. Ointment. Help. He crawled forward, belly low, tail still. Closer, then stood. The younger medic saw him first. Whoa, hey, she whispered. You see that? The older man turned. Damn. That's a shepherd. Ghost stood 5 feet away, head lowered but alert, eyes locked onto theirs. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He just stared, then turned, took 3 steps, stopped, looked back. Is he waiting? The young woman asked. I don't know. Maybe lost? Ghost took another step, paused, looked again. A message, as ancient as wolves. Follow. He took off not fast, but with purpose. The man hesitated. We should call animal control. But the woman was already moving. Number, he's not wild. Look at him. He wants something. She jogged after the dog. Come on. Ghost didn't look back again. He didn't need to. They reached the warehouse 15 minutes later. Ghost stopped at the wall, pawed once at the vent, then backed away. The woman leaned down. You trying to show us something, buddy? The man muttered. This is crazy. Could be nothing. She crouched, pressed her ear to the vent. Her face changed. Wait. There's someone in there. Yeah. They broke open the side door with a crowbar from the ambulance. The cold inside hit like a wall, the scent of rust and damp insulation thick in the air. They followed Ghost. He led them straight to the hatch. They opened it. A groan echoed from below. And then, help! A voice, broken and hoarse. Daniel! Ghost didn't move. He stood beside the stairwell, breath fogging the air, watching. When the medics descended, when the radio chatter lit up the silence, when sirens echoed in the distance, Ghost simply backed away. No one noticed. He slipped back into the snow before the first responders arrived. Gone. But not forgotten. Not this time. Not by Daniel. Not by the woman who followed him. And not by the instinct that refused to die. The morning sun hadn't yet breached the ridgeline when Dr. Ivy Thompson pulled on her worn denim jacket, the one with the frayed collar and faint smell of antiseptic that clung to the fabric like memory. Outside, the air bit cold, not the sharp teeth of a blizzard, but a steady, gnawing chill that settled into bones and lingered. Snow crunched under her boots as she made her way to the alley behind the Thompson Animal Clinic. A familiar rhythm, quiet and tender. Every morning, before the town stirred, Ivy walked this short path with a dented tin bowl in one hand and a bag of dry kibble in the other. Not because she had to. No, the strays didn't pay her bills, didn't fill the clinic with adoptable charm like the pups in the front kennels. But they came ragged, limping, cautious creatures, and Ivy understood something about moving through the world on frayed edges. She poured the kibble into the dish, the sound of tiny pebbles rattling against metal echoing in the stillness. A small clink, a small kindness. She waited. Most mornings, a one-eyed tabby appeared first. Sometimes a mottled terrier missing half an ear. Lately, there had been a larger shadow. No collar, no name, just eyes. Gold, steady, unblinking. And this morning, he came again. He didn't slink like the others. He moved like smoke, quiet, direct, as if he wasn't there for food but for something else entirely. A German shepherd, tall and lean, ribs barely veiled by a thick, unkempt coat. His left flank bore an old scar, crescent-shaped, angry even under the fur. His gait was uneven, yet purposeful. Ivy stayed still, like she always did. No coaxing, no reaching. Trust didn't speak fluent language. It spoke patience. He didn't touch the kibble. Instead, he stepped forward, jaw tense, and dropped something at her feet. Ivy looked down. It wasn't a stick, wasn't roadkill. It was a boot, half frozen, leather cracked, the sole worn smooth from long use. The laces dangled like veins. Blood darkened the toe. Her breath caught before her mind did. She crouched, instinct taking over. A police-issued tactical boot. Scuffed badge emblems stitched into the tongue, one she'd seen many times when working with local officers on K9 injuries and tranquilizer protocols. She touched the blood. Flaked. Dry. But not old. Ivy swallowed hard. This wasn't road debris or a forgotten donation pile. This was fresh. Intentional. She looked up, and he was still watching. That German shepherd. That nameless, scarred sentinel. His ears flicked as if responding to something beyond her hearing. His tail gave a single swish, and in that flickering second, she saw it. Not just fear, not just hunger, urgency. Something in him was trying to speak. Ivy stood slowly, heart thudding in her ribs. Where did you get this? The dog tilted his head, then turned. He padded several steps away, stopped, looked back, waiting. A trail, she realized. He was leaving one. Or leading one. She hesitated, instincts clashing, vet, soldier, civilian. Her fingers clenched tighter around the boot. The badge was faint, but she could make it out now. Daniel Whitaker, one of the youngest officers on the force. Quiet, earnest. He brought her coffee once, after she patched up his partner Shepard. His canine had died in a warehouse fire last spring. He hadn't spoken much after that. "Is this from him?" Ivy whispered. The dog let out a soft, almost imperceptible whine. Then he turned again and began walking toward the edge of the alley, where snowbanks framed the mouth like sentinels. She took a breath and followed. But after 5 steps, he vanished as though the white had swallowed him whole. Ivy stood frozen, alone in the frost-bitten stillness, boot in hand, breath clouding the air like smoke from a fading fire. A gust of wind swept through the alley, lifting the corner of an old flyer nailed to the telephone pole. The paper fluttered, revealing the word "missing" in black block letters. Below it, a grainy photo of Officer Whitaker. Ivy hadn't even noticed it was up, but Ghost had. She turned slowly back toward the clinic, her mind already shifting into another gear, one she hadn't used in years. The gear that learned to read battlefield wounds, that made choices in triage tents no one else wanted to make. She needed a medical kit. Something light. A thermal blanket. Flashlight. Rope. And a weapon. Her pulse ticked faster. She didn't know what this dog was trying to show her, but something inside her, the place that once stood tall under desert suns and blacked-out medevac nights, whispered it was real, and that someone might still be alive. As she stepped back into the clinic and locked the door behind her, she caught her reflection in the glass, tired eyes, streak of gray in the temple, boot clenched in one hand like a question no one had asked yet. Then she looked closer. On the boot's sole, a faint smear. Not just blood, a scrap of dried mud, red clay, and something else, crushed pine needles. She narrowed her gaze. Only one place around here had soil like that. The old lumber yard near the frozen creek bed, abandoned since the storm 3 years ago. No one went there now. No one. Except, maybe, something wild. Or something still loyal. The snow was still falling in soft spirals when Ivy slid the stained boot into a brown evidence bag and sealed it with shaking hands. Her fingers, still cold despite the gloves, hovered for a moment before pressing the plastic flat. It wasn't the blood that rattled her. She'd seen worse. Stitched worse. It was the badge emblem on the tongue of the boot. Half faded, but unmistakable. Riverside Police Department. She hadn't heard that name in years. Ghost had vanished the moment she moved toward him, just a dark blur against the dawn. No collar, no hesitation. As if he'd known his job was done. As if the delivery of that one piece of truth was enough. She stood there in the alley behind her clinic, breath visible, the snow crunching beneath her boots as she made her way back inside. Her office, small and sparsely decorated, felt warmer than usual. Or maybe it was just her pulse. On the desk sat a name she hadn't spoken aloud in almost 6 years, Sheriff Morgan. Ivy reached for the old Rolodex, tucked behind a stack of vaccination records. Her fingers found the tab, M. She hesitated. Then she dialed. The line crackled once, then connected. "Sheriff's office," Carla speaking. "This is Dr. Ivy Thompson," she said, her voice low. "I need to speak with Morgan. Tell him it's urgent, and it's about Daniel." A pause. A sharp intake of breath. "Hold, please. M." Static hummed in her ear for what felt like hours before the line clicked again. "Ivy!" Sheriff Morgan's voice was gravel, worn down with age and the weight of too many dead ends. "You just said Daniel? I have something you need to see." Silence. Then, more quietly. "Where?" "Back lot of my clinic. Bring gloves." He arrived faster than she expected, 15 minutes, maybe 20, in an unmarked SUV dusted with road salt. His face looked older than she remembered. The years had carved deep grooves beneath his eyes. Grief had hollowed the rest. But his posture was still that of a man who didn't let go of a case, not really. Just waited in the dark, like a dog with its ear pressed to the earth. He stepped out, nodded once. "Where is it?" She handed him the bag. He studied it without a word, turned it in his gloved hands. His jaw locked when he saw the badge. "I didn't think I'd ever see that again," he murmured. "That's Daniel's," his voice caught in his throat. "He was wearing these when he disappeared." Ivy finished. He nodded. "We assumed they took everything. Burned what they didn't." "Not this." She paused. "A dog brought it to me." Morgan looked up. "A dog. German Shepherd. Scarred, doesn't get close, left it, and disappeared again into the snow." She didn't mention the way he'd looked at her just once before, turning away. Like he remembered something, too. The sheriff's brow furrowed. "You're sure about the dog? I was military vet, remember? I know how trained dogs behave. He didn't act wild. He acted like he still had a mission." Morgan stepped back, his boots crunching on the gravel. His eyes scanned the edge of the lot, where the tracks disappeared into the white blur. "Wherever that dog came from, someone taught him how to find people. He might be your only lead," Ivy said softly. Morgan took a long breath, then nodded as if committing to something invisible. "I never stopped looking for Daniel," he said. "But they shut it down. Said no signs of foul play. Said he ran." Ivy's voice was quiet. "Daniel Keller doesn't run." "No," Morgan said. "He doesn't." He turned toward his SUV, pulled a radio from the front seat, and spoke in clipped tones. "This is Morgan. I'm reopening Case 48. Be Daniel Keller. I want everything pulled: files, photos, last known addresses, and notify forensics. We've got new evidence." He hung up and faced her again. "Why now?" Ivy asked. "Because someone didn't burn everything," he said, lifting the boot. "And something out there wants us to find the rest." They stood in silence for a long moment. And then Morgan's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, frowned. "What is it?" Ivy asked. "Security cam flagged something near the old mill. About 30 minutes ago. Motion detected, canine-sized. Matches the direction your stray ran off to." Ivy's heart kicked once in her chest. "You going after him?" Morgan nodded. "That dog's trying to tell us something." Then he paused and looked at her. "You still patch up strays?" Her smile was faint, almost weary. "Always." "Then keep the back door open." He slid into the SUV, tires crunching over the snow, and was gone. From her office window, Ivy watched the sheriff's taillights disappear into the storm. She held the empty evidence bag in her hands like it still meant something. Like it held more than just leather and dried blood. Maybe it did. She turned toward the hallway, flicked off the overhead light, and sat down beside the space heater where she always left food out for strays. This time, she added a blanket, just in case the ghost came back. The boot lay on the counter like a silent confession. Blood crusted the heel, dark and flaked like rust. The leather was torn at the ankle, not by wear, but by violence. Ivy Thompson stood still, hands hovering just above the evidence, reluctant to touch it again. The snowmelt on its sole had already formed a small puddle on the metal tray. She hadn't wiped it off. Somehow, the water made it more real, more human. She leaned forward, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, her breath catching when her eyes locked onto the emblem. A police badge, half sewn into the boot side, faded, stitched in a way only a few departments still did. And below it, the frayed edge of an embroidered name tag. The threads had been torn, but the last few letters remained. L. "Daniel?" She whispered the name before she meant to. It tasted like grief and disbelief and something she hadn't let herself feel in months. Her fingers touched the dried blood, cold, brittle, the kind that no longer smelled like iron but held the weight of time past. And with that touch, something in her memory cracked open. It was in the tent, somewhere outside Mosul. The desert wind had howled all night, scraping sand against the canvas like nails across skin. She was younger then, sharper, still full of rage and purpose. The kind of doctor who ran toward explosions because she refused to lose anyone else. They'd brought the dog in wrapped in burlap, his left flank torn open from shrapnel. A German shepherd, not quite full grown. His eyes were fever bright, his breathing shallow. The tag on his collar had read, Ghost. No rank, just that name, stamped in military black. He hadn't barked, hadn't whimpered, only stared at her with an intensity that unnerved even the most seasoned medics, as if he were cataloging everyone in the tent, weighing them not as threats, but as souls. "You stay with me, all right?" Ivy had whispered as she worked on the wound. "You're not done yet." She hadn't thought about that day in years. Or the weeks after, when Ghost would limp into her station just to sit near her cot. No one had trained him to. He just came. He would lie there, unblinking, until the sun crept through the seams in the canvas. Like he knew the war inside her wasn't over either. Now, standing alone in her clinic, Ivy blinked hard, as if she could will the memory away. But something inside her twisted. The eyes, that dog, today. It had to be the same one. Older, yes. Scarred in new places. He'd been thinner. his coat dulled by exposure. But those eyes, she remembered them. Like you remember pain. Involuntarily. "I know you," she murmured. She moved to the window, pulling aside the curtain. Outside, the wind had quieted. Snow blanketed the alley behind the clinic, erasing tracks faster than they could form. But he'd been here, left the boot, and disappeared again like smoke. Why now? Why this? She turned back to the counter, her mind racing. The boot hadn't just been a cry for help. It was direction, a nudge, an old instinct from a dog once trained to find and protect lives. And he brought it to her. Not the sheriff, not some stranger on the road, to her. She exhaled, sat slowly at the stool by the tray. Her fingers moved to the old field kit she kept in a drawer, bandages, tweezers, saline, habit, memory. Ghost had once let her clean out shards of glass from his paw. He hadn't flinched then either. A soft knock broke the quiet. Ivy turned. No one stood at the door. Not human, anyway. A shadow lingered near the side gate, just beyond the reach of the porch light. Ears alert, tail still, watching. She stepped to the door, heart hammering. "Ghost?" She said it like a prayer. The dog didn't move forward, but he didn't run either. He stared at her through the darkness, eyes catching the faint amber from the porch bulb. They weren't the eyes of a stray. Not entirely. There was calculation there. Recognition. Maybe even trust. Buried deep beneath the layers of survival. "I don't know what happened to him," she said, voice cracking. "But you do, don't you?" Wind brushed past them. Ghost lowered his head just slightly, a nod, almost imperceptible, and then turned, vanishing again into the snow like he'd never been there at all. Ivy stood in the silence he left behind. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she moved back to the counter, picked up the boot, and gently wrapped it in gauze and linen like she would a wound. Then, with hands that hadn't trembled in a long time, she placed it in a sealed evidence bag. Ghost had brought her something sacred, not just a clue, but a choice. She glanced once more at the empty alley. Wherever that dog had come from, whatever he had seen, he had come back not just to remember, but to remind her. And Ivy Thompson, doctor, veteran, survivor, understood now that some calls to duty didn't come with orders. They came on 4 legs, in the dark, with eyes full of memory. The rain had turned to snow sometime after midnight, leaving a dusting of white across the old squad parking lot behind the sheriff's office. Inside, the faint hum of a space heater buzzed beneath the dull clatter of fingers against a keyboard. Sheriff Eli Morgan leaned over Sergeant Mara Chen's shoulder, both staring into the dim glow of her computer monitor. Her fingers paused, hovering over the keys, tension running silent through her jaw. "I'm telling you," she murmured, "this dog, he's not just some stray. He knew where to go, who to bring that boot to. It's not random." Eli nodded slowly. His eyes, worn from decades of reading too much grief in people's faces, were sharper now, alert in a way they hadn't been since the day Daniel Cole vanished. Mara tapped again, and the screen shifted. Military interface, restricted access. She typed in an old passphrase, exhaled, and began scrolling. "You're really digging into DoD K-9 records?" Eli asked. "If he's trained like I think he is, he'll be in the system. Somewhere." Mara's voice was clipped, more focused than usual. "I ran a quick image scan earlier. The scars around the right flank, the ear notch, that's surgical, not accidental. He's not just military. He's seen combat." They scrolled past grainy ID photos, handler logs, discharge statuses, pages of service dogs, each with their own story, their own handler, most ending in retired, deceased, or Kia. Then they saw it. Unit RG-17, call sign, Ghost. A lean, dark-coated German shepherd stared out from the file photo. His eyes, hauntingly familiar, seemed to follow them even in stillness. The same eyes that had stood frozen on Ivy's porch that morning, glinting with a depth that defied logic. "Handler, Sergeant Elena Moore," Mara read aloud. Eli's breath caught. Moore? Wasn't she the one? Killed in action. Yeah. Explosion outside Bagram. She and Ghost were separated in the chaos. Her body was recovered a week later. Ghost was declared MIA. Mara leaned back in her chair. 2 years ago. Oh. They stared at the screen in silence. Ghost's service record was extensive patrols, search and rescue missions, drug detection, even one high-risk extraction in a collapsed village following a landslide. But what struck Mara most wasn't the medals. It was the final note in his file. Disposition. Presumed deceased. No recovery. Last confirmed location. Outside Forward Operating Base, Mohan. And yet, somehow, he had made it back. Across continents, oceans, and time back to the United States. Back to a trail. How does a dog survive that kind of journey? Eli asked, not really expecting an answer. He doesn't just survive, Mara said quietly. He remembers. The heater clicked, throwing warmth against the cold stillness of the office. Outside, the wind began to pick up, brushing snow against the windows like a whisper of the past. Eli moved to the whiteboard at the far end of the room. Daniel's case files still hung there, pinned like ghosts themselves. Maps, timelines. And now, next to them, the photo of a blood-stained boot. He stared at it, then back at Ghost's eyes on the screen. All this time, he said more to himself than Mara, we thought the trail went cold, that we lost everything. Mara didn't speak. Her eyes had softened now, barely blinking as she hovered the cursor over a side tab in the file, Behavioral Notes. She clicked, and there it was. Highly responsive to vocal cues, but more notable is nonverbal pattern memory. Ghost has an uncanny ability to retain environmental routes, specific sequences, and human scent patterns well beyond the norm. Possible anomaly. Handler notes, he doesn't need commands. He needs purpose. Mara blinked hard. He's not lost, Sheriff. He's looking for someone. Eli's voice was almost a whisper. Or trying to lead us somewhere. For a long moment, the two officers sat in silence. Not the dead kind, the heavy, haunted silence of closed cases, but a fragile one, on the edge of something awakening, something still alive. Print the file, Eli said. Get me everything. I want to cross-reference every sighting of strays within 50 miles, track patterns, timestamps. If Ghost is circling something, we need to know what. Mara hesitated. You really think he's trying to solve this? Eli looked at the photo again. I think that dog saw something no one else did, and I think he's the only one still out there who hasn't given up. His voice caught slightly at the end, not with emotion, but with the weight of truth. Behind them, the monitor dimmed slightly, casting Ghost's eyes in shadow. But they still glowed, as if waiting, as if watching. The morning air inside the sheriff's office was brittle with cold, the kind that settled in your bones long before the snow arrived. Sheriff Eli Morgan stood by the window, staring out into the white blur crawling down the ridge like an omen. His fingers tapped absently on the windowsill, not from impatience, but calculation. Sergeant Mara Chen stood a few feet away, arms folded across her vest. Her eyes, sharp and methodical, were fixed on the map spread out across the table. Red pins, yellow markers. One lonely green flag near the abandoned rail yard. Beside it, a dog paw etched in ink. You're sure it's him? She asked, though the answer had already cemented itself. Eli nodded once. Same unit, same scars, same eyes. Mara exhaled. Then this wasn't random. No, Eli said. His voice dropped a register. Ghost didn't just survive. He remembered. He moved to the center of the room, the hum of the baseboard heater barely masking the quiet weight of the moment. He placed his palm on the table, over the green flag. We're going in. Officially? Mara raised a brow. Eli's jaw twitched. No sirens. No headlines. This doesn't go through dispatch. Not yet. A long silence. Then Mara straightened. Then we'll need people who won't ask questions. I already made the calls, Eli replied. 2 old search and rescue boys from McAllister off duty. And Quinix, K9, owes me a favor. They're quiet, trustworthy. And if we find something, she asked gently. If we find Daniel, Eli said, eyes dark, we bring him home. If we find who took him, we finish what the system couldn't. Mara looked at him. And if we don't find anything at all? Eli didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the envelope Ivy had dropped off. The boot was sealed inside a transparent evidence pouch, but it wasn't the bloodstain that held his focus now. It was the badge tag, DETD, River's number 0738, still faintly visible under the grime and dried rust. He's still out there, Eli whispered. From the hallway, the old floorboards creaked a soft, hesitant rhythm. Ghost appeared like breath materializing from shadow. His coat was matted, his ribs pressing beneath fur too thin for winter. Yet those ice-cold steel, rimmed in quiet fire, had not dulled. He didn't bark, didn't whine, just stood there, tail low, gaze locked with Eli's, as if he understood the room, the plan, the urgency. A soldier still carrying orders long after the battlefield had gone silent. "He's waiting," Mara said quietly. Eli moved toward the door, grabbing his heavy coat and the file folder containing Ghost's declassified records. On the way out, he flipped the switch near the radio but didn't key the mic. No broadcast. No protocol, just silence. The air outside had thickened, gray and heavy, like it was bracing for something. The kind of sky that swallows sound. They met at the edge of the woods, 5 of them, all in dark, unmarked gear, layered against the storm pushing in from the north. No unit insignias, no chatter, just nods and shared history. Ghost padded quietly between them, ears alert, tail low but steady. Eli gave the only briefing they'd get. "We follow him. No split-ups, no radios unless absolutely necessary. Weather reports say we've got 6 hours before whiteout conditions." Mara pointed to the satellite map. "There's a storm drain system running under the old factory. Vent shafts too small for a person, but just wide enough for a dog." Everyone looked at Ghost. He stared at the horizon, the direction of the warehouse district. Eli dropped to one knee beside him. "You know where he is, don't you?" A beat passed. Then Ghost moved. Not fast, not excited, purposeful. They crossed beneath dead power lines, boots crunching frozen mud, until the last signs of town were behind them. Snow began to fall in wide, silent flakes, not heavy yet, but enough to erase tracks quickly. Ghost stopped once, sniffed the wind, then veered left, toward the storm drains. The group moved as one, like a muscle memory, long forgotten but not gone. Mara checked her weapon once, then resecured it. Quinn pulled up the collar of his coat, muttering, "Feels like Fallujah all over again." No one laughed. This wasn't a mission. It was a reckoning. At the mouth of the storm tunnel, Ghost paused. The concrete opening yawned black and breathless. Snow clung to the edges like ash. Then, a sound, barely audible, but Ghost tensed. A whimper. From deep within the tunnel, faint as a memory. Mara dropped to a crouch. "Someone's alive." Eli motioned to the others. "Hold perimeter, we go in." Ghost led the way, each paw step a whisper in the dark. Ivy's words echoed in Eli's mind from the night before. "He brought me a boot. Not just any boot. It had blood on it, Eli. He's trying to tell us something." And now, in the dark heart of this frozen town, the message was getting clearer. They descended deeper. The air grew colder, heavier. The flashlight beam skimmed rusted pipes, rat nests, remnants of lives lost to decay. Then Ghost stopped. He crouched low, ears forward. A low growl pulsed from his throat. Not threat, warning. Eli raised a hand. Everyone froze. Then they heard it chains, movement, a cough, and a voice. Weak, hoarse. "Hello?" Mara's eyes widened. "That's Daniel." Eli nodded, heart hammering. They moved. No sirens, no orders, just silence, and the sound of a dog leading the way home. The darkness hadn't changed, not in hours or days. Daniel couldn't tell anymore. The blindfold scratched his face each time he shifted, the rope at his wrists biting deeper with every tremor. The warehouse basement smelled of rust, mold, and something older, something forgotten. Cold seeped into the concrete, climbed through his boots, up his spine, and settled behind his ribs like frost. He was fading. Thirst coated his tongue in cotton. His thoughts drifted like smoke, blurring memory and dream. Then came the sound. A faint scratch. Soft at first, almost like the building groaning. But it came again. Closer. Intentional. His pulse twitched. Daniel strained against the binds, heart stuttering like an engine in the cold. Another scrape. Low. Rhythmic. Nails. Claws. And then a nose. Wet and real. Pressed against the back of his hand. He froze. His breath caught. A warm tongue licked where the rope had frayed his skin, pausing on the spot where blood had dried into a dark ridge. The lick wasn't hungry. It was gentle, familiar. Daniel couldn't stop the breath that broke from him. A soft, guttural sound, part laugh, part sob. Ghost? Another lick, then a small grunt, like a low exhale. I knew you'd come. End of 2. The words fell from him like glass, from trembling fingers. Ghost whined, not loud, just enough for Daniel to feel it vibrate against the floor. He heard the dog move, felt the weight shift, paws stepping around him with an odd, cautious precision. Then teeth, soft but determined, tugging at the coarse fibers binding Daniel's wrist. The rope didn't budge. Ghost paused, let out a frustrated huff through his nose, then tried again, jaw working side to side. Daniel winced. The motion burned the raw skin underneath, but he didn't stop it. The pain was real. It meant he wasn't dreaming. His body shuddered with another wave of cold, his shirt soaked through with sweat that had long since gone icy. He turned his face toward where he thought Ghost was and whispered again. "They told me you were dead," he murmured. "Said the mission went south. No survivors." Ghost stilled, as if listening. "I didn't believe it," Daniel rasped. "I kept hearing you, every night, in my sleep. I remembered your eyes, the way you'd sit beside me without being told. Like you knew." Ghost let out a sound, a breath more than a bark, low and broken at the edges. Then, something thudded behind them. Daniel flinched, but Ghost didn't growl. Instead, the dog turned and padded away briefly, claws clicking against concrete. The scraping returned, this time from metal. Daniel listened through the ringing in his ears. A clatter. Then weight. Pressure against his side, something soft, a body curling beside him. Ghost had laid down. For a moment Daniel couldn't move, couldn't speak. The tears didn't come like a flood, just a slow leak from the corners of his eyes. Silent, relentless. He leaned his shoulder just enough to brush against the dog's fur. Thin, wiry, cold, but present. "You came back." Ghost didn't answer. He didn't have to. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. The only sound was their breathing. Shallow, syncopated. A rhythm formed between man and dog, the unspoken cadence of survival. Somewhere above them, the wind howled. A storm was building. The warehouse creaked with pressure and age. But down here, in the dark, Daniel wasn't alone anymore. And that was enough. Until Ghost stood. He moved with sudden purpose, pacing in a tight circle, then pawing once at the ground. He barked sharp, short, urgent. "Someone's coming?" Daniel asked. Voice no more than sand on stone. Ghost barked again, then nudged Daniel's side with his snout. He pawed at the rope now, not chewing, but gesturing, trying to rouse him. Daniel groaned, sitting up with effort. Pain bloomed across his back. His muscles protested, but he turned toward the direction of the bark. "What is it?" Ghost growled low, not at Daniel, but toward the stairwell. Something stirred above. Footsteps. Distant, but steady. Ghost stepped forward, positioning himself between Daniel and the source of the sound. He didn't bark again, just crouched, ears forward, body taut like a spring. His entire form became stillness, wrapped in instinct. And then, silence. Daniel held his breath. The footsteps stopped. Ghost didn't move. Then a door creaked. A slam. Nothing. The moment passed like the eye of a storm, fragile and unnerving. Ghost turned back, nose brushing Daniel's face once. Then, without a sound, padded toward the far corner of the basement. Another sound metallic echoed. A pipe? A grate? Daniel couldn't see, but he felt Ghost slip away again. Heard the low grunt of effort. Something was shifting. A vent? Realization hit like heat through frost. "You're finding the way back." The thought wrapped around his fading consciousness like a blanket. It wasn't hope yet, not fully, but something adjacent. Faith, maybe. Or trust. Daniel slumped against the wall, breath trembling. He whispered, "Find help, boy." Ghost paused, just once, at the edge of the darkness. And then he was gone, into the cold, into the storm, into the silence that wasn't so empty anymore. The dark wrapped around him like wet canvas, too close, too heavy. Daniel's throat burned with thirst. His wrists stung under the pressure of ropes soaked in blood and sweat. But it was the silence that had begun to gnaw at the last threads of his sanity. The kind of silence that made a man doubt his own breath. Then came the sound, subtle, a shuffle, like snow pressed beneath padded feet. He didn't open his eyes, couldn't, not since they blindfolded him days ago, or maybe weeks. Time had warped in here. He thought the first time he heard the scratching it was the cold playing games, or rats. Then the wet warmth of a tongue touched his wrist. Daniel flinched, weakly. It hurt to move. The tongue came again, slower, this time deliberate. Then, the soft thump of something settling beside him. Breathing, measured, steady, not human, not a hallucination, a presence. And with it, something old stirred in his chest. The memory of a different kind of silence. A waiting kind. Loyal. The knot at the back of his head tugged, then pressure, small teeth gently working the cloth. Not biting, worrying it like a pup might a toy. Daniel held still, heart stuttering. And then, light. Dim and pale, but to his raw eyes it was a flood. His lids blinked slowly, dry and sore, adjusting. The room came in fragments, a cracked concrete ceiling, mold gathering like storm clouds, a flickering bulb that swung faintly overhead, and just below it, a silhouette, fur-matted, flanks gaunt from long travel, but those ears alert, and the eyes, gold, rimmed in gray, watchful, knowing. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Ghost. The dog didn't move. He sat like a statue carved from shadow and frost, his chest rising and falling in rhythm with Daniel's shallow breathing. The air between them held no drama, no reunion of music or thunder, just the quiet understanding of those who've been through war and wilderness alike. Daniel's eyes welled up, not from the pain, not even from the hope, but from the certainty that this dog had remembered, had found him. I knew, his voice cracked. I knew you'd come. Ghost's tail gave the barest flick. The bulb above them hissed, flickered once, then again. And then, the sound footsteps. Wood groaning upstairs. Slow, deliberate, not the careless thuds of someone just passing through. These were the steps of someone returning, checking. Ghost didn't growl, didn't bark. He shifted one paw forward, body low, eyes trained on the ceiling like a sentinel sensing the shift in wind. For all his years lost and wild, the soldier in him had never left. Daniel tried to sit up, but the ropes yanked his raw skin and brought him back down with a soft gasp. The light flickered harder. Shadows danced across the far wall like specters. Ghost stepped forward, stood just beside Daniel's body now, shielding him with his frame. The footsteps paused, a moment of stillness, the kind that tightens lungs. Daniel turned his head toward Ghost. "Don't do anything stupid," he murmured, breath shallow. But Ghost didn't respond. He didn't need to. His job wasn't to run or fight. Not yet. His job was to wait, to protect, to watch. The door above creaked, hinges straining. A cough, a boot scraping against wood. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut again, not from fear but instinct. If they came down now, Ghost might have to act, and he couldn't help, couldn't stop anything. But the steps moved away, retreating, not far, but enough. The bulb buzzed once more, a sickly halo of light above the pair. Ghost turned back to Daniel, lowered his head gently, touching his snout to the man's chest. Just a second, then back to guard, like a ghost reclaiming his post. Snow scratched faintly against the clinic windows, a whisper compared to the thundering pulse in Ivy's ears. The folder in her hands felt heavier than it should have, not because of its contents, but because of what it meant. Ghost's file, a patchwork of dates, wounds, field notes, and recovery scans, was more than just paper. It was proof of a past, of service, of memory that ran deeper than training. Sheriff Eli Morgan and Sergeant Mara Chen waited in the modest exam room she'd turned into an impromptu war room. The heat barely kept up with the weather outside. Mara sipped gas station coffee from a paper cup, her fingers drumming nervously on the side. Eli stood by the cabinet, arms crossed, expression carved from stone. Ivy stepped in and placed the folder gently on the counter between them. "I know what he is now," she said softly, her voice clipped at the edges from a night of no sleep. "He's not just a stray." Mara opened the folder, flipping through scans the X-ray of a healed rib fracture, the surgical notes on shrapnel removal, a photo of Ghost's left flank, marked with a faint, silvery scar. Her eyes slowed on a page with a paw print, black ink pressed onto white paper, the same one that matched the faded scan in the military database. Her brow arched. "I treated him 2 winters ago," Ivy continued. "He showed up behind the clinic bullet wound, signs of exposure, PTSD responses. Wouldn't let anyone near but me. No chip, no tags. But the way he reacted to commands, it wasn't random." Eli nodded slowly. "You think it's the same dog from the RG-17 unit? I'd stake my license on it." Mara closed the folder. "You won't have to." There was a beat of quiet, the kind that happens when truth is finally given room to settle in a space not just heard, but felt. Ivy leaned against the counter, arms folded across her chest. "I gave him antibiotics, rehydration. Let him sleep in the storage room behind the exam table," she said, voice dipping into something almost fond. "He left on the 4th night, quiet, like he knew what he came for and it was done." "You didn't report him?" Eli asked, though his tone wasn't accusatory. "Number. He wasn't ready to be found. And honestly, I think some part of me wasn't ready to let the military take him back." Something in his eyes. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Mara tapped the cover of the folder. "With this, we can request a status change. He shouldn't be labeled feral. Not with confirmed service, handler record, and a known injury log." "And if we push it?" Ivy asked. "We reclassify him as a former K-9 operative. That makes him government property, yes, but also makes it illegal for any shelter or patrol to euthanize or detain without due process." "Then do it," Ivy said firmly. "Do it before someone calls him a danger just for surviving." A knock rattled the exam room door. Deputy Sawyer leaned in, wind-blown and red-cheeked. "Sergeant? Sheriff? We've got something." Eli straightened. "What kind of something?" The drone sweep had picked up thermal irregularities on the east end of the Ridgemont warehouse complex. A static heat signature, low and steady, near the cold storage units. But something else, too. Movement. Small. Controlled. Like pacing. Mara exchanged a quick glance with Eli. "2 signatures? Could be." Ivy's breath caught. "What's the ETA if you move now?" she asked. Eli looked to Mara, who already had her phone out, tapping coordinates into a secure message chain. 15 minutes, if the storm holds off," Mara replied. "We'll go in silent. No sirens, no lights. They'll hear the wind long before they hear tires," Eli added. Ivy stepped forward. "I want to come." Eli hesitated. "Ivy, he came to me for a reason. I know his wounds. I know how he moves. If he's injured, you'll need someone who understands him." Mara considered her for a long second. "You stay in the vehicle until it's safe." Ivy nodded, already pulling her coat from the back of the chair. As they headed out, Ivy paused by the door and looked back at the exam table, the faint impression where Ghost had once rested during recovery. For a moment, her gaze softened, not nostalgic, but resolute. "He remembered," she said, almost to herself. Eli turned. "What was that?" She glanced at him. "You were right, Sheriff. He didn't just wander. He remembered." Mara's voice came steady, calm. "Then we follow his memory, and we finish what he started." Outside, the wind had begun to howl. The metal door groaned on its hinges long, aching like it hadn't been used in days. Dust scattered from the frame, shaken loose by the sudden movement. Cold air slipped down the concrete steps, curling through the dimness like a warning. Daniel didn't flinch this time. He barely had the strength. His lips were cracked, his head leaned against the stone wall, and the rope around his wrists bit into skin already rubbed raw. But his eyes, barely open, flicked toward the sound. Footsteps. Heavy. Familiar. Methodical. Boots. On concrete. The figure that emerged into the flickering bulb light was broad-shouldered and limping. His breath steamed in the chill. Gray stubble dusted his jaw, and his security jacket years out of regulation was zipped halfway up against the cold. In one gloved hand, He clutched an old thermos. The other held a keyring that jingled with each step. Ray Morton. He stood at the bottom of the stairs for a long moment, looking at Daniel not like a man looking at a prisoner, but like someone staring at an old wound that wouldn't heal. "I told them," Ray muttered, voice fraying with something deeper than anger. "I told them he mattered, that you don't just replace loyalty with paperwork." His hand trembled as he set the thermos down on a rusted table in the corner. The bulb above him buzzed faintly. On the other side of the room, just beyond the reach of light, something shifted. Ghost didn't growl. He didn't bark. He watched. From the shadows behind a broken oil drum, the dog's body was tense, still as coiled wire. His ears were forward, tracking every twitch of the man's hands. His breath was silent. But his eyes, those eyes that remembered desert fire and command posts and sacrifice never, left Ray's movements. "I gave everything to that program," Ray went on, pacing now, unraveling in front of Daniel's glazed stare. "Gave them my time, my knees, my goddamn spine. And what did they do when it all went wrong? Shut it down, swept it under, and left me in the cold." He turned sharply. There was something frenzied behind his eyes now, a glint that didn't belong to reason. "I saw your name," he said to Daniel, voice quieter. "On the memo. You were one of them." "Not just some suit. They said you made the call." Daniel didn't speak. Couldn't. His tongue felt like sandpaper against his teeth, but his brow furrowed, just faintly, a sign of life, a question trying to rise. Ray saw it, and he laughed, dry and bitter. "You don't even remember, do you?" he spat. "None of you ever remember the names, just protocols and cutbacks and operational risk. But I remember. I remember Ghost." At that word, the shadows shifted again. Still no sound, just a slow movement, measured, precise. Ghost crouched lower, stalking not for the kill, but for the wait, for the right second, like he'd been trained to. Like he still knew how to be a soldier. "I built that dog from the ground up," Ray murmured, voice shaking now, not with rage, but memory. "Watched him take a bullet for a handler who didn't even last the year. And what did they do when he faltered? Decommissioned. Tossed him in with the rest. Said he was unstable. Said he couldn't be trusted." Ray sat heavily on the stool near the cot where Daniel lay. His shoulders slumped. "I saw him last winter," he said, softer now. "Out by the fence line. Half-starved. Didn't bark. Didn't whimper. Just stood there and watched me, like he wanted to understand why. Why they left him. Why he wasn't allowed to serve anymore. A pause. Guess he never stopped searching." In the dark, Ghost's head tilted, just slightly. His paws were silent as he crept forward, inch by inch. Every muscle under his coat pulled tight with purpose. He could smell the man now. Smell the rusted scent of old boots, the oil on his gloves, the vague ghost of meat on the thermos lid. He was close. Ray's breath came shakily. He looked down at Daniel again, something broken behind his eyes. "I didn't mean to hurt him," he said, almost like a confession. "I just wanted someone to listen, someone to remember." He stood again, and in that motion quick, off-balance the keys clattered to the floor. The sound cracked through the stillness like a gunshot. Ray cursed, bent down, and that was when Ghost moved. Not with fury, with precision. Out of the dark he came. No bark, no snarl, just a streak of fur and instinct. His teeth closed around the sleeve of Ray's coat, pulling him away from Daniel in a single calculated lunge. Ray yelped, stumbled backward into the wall. Ghost didn't tear, didn't maul. He released the arm, then stood between Daniel and the man like a stone sentinel, shoulders squared, chest heaving. His growl was low and guttural now, a warning not out of rage, but command. Ray froze. "Ghost," he whispered, voice full of disbelief. "Is that really you?" The dog didn't move, just stared. And for the first time, Ray looked like a man facing something holy and unforgiving. Recognition, regret, a lifetime collapsing into a single second. He didn't try to approach again. From the cot, Daniel whispered hoarsely, "He never forgot." The words barely made it out of his throat, but Ghost's ears twitched. He turned slightly, just enough to glance at Daniel, and in that glance was everything. A mission remembered, a loyalty unbroken, a bond stronger than orders. Upstairs, the floor creaked. Ray startled. Ghost crouched low again, eyes snapping to the ceiling. Someone else was here. Someone who didn't belong. The box cutter in Ray Morton's hand caught the dim light from the basement bulb, its edge trembling with the weight of a mind unraveling. His breaths were uneven, jaw tight, the same as it had been during his old security briefings, only now there was no protocol left. Just ghosts, real and imagined. Daniel sat against the support beam, wrists raw from the ropes, his head lolled sideways, weak from dehydration and days of fear. But his voice, when it came, was steady. "You don't have to do this, Ray." Ray scoffed, circling him like a man lost between vengeance and guilt. They said it was an accident, called it mechanical failure. That's what they said about my boy, too. But I know better. You people make mistakes and bury them with flags. Daniel's eyes blinked through the blur, focusing now. "Ray, your son, he wasn't in my unit. I'm sorry for your loss, but I wasn't there." Ray flinched. The box cutter twitched in his grip. "Number." "But you signed off on the drone specs. You sat in that committee. I read the records. I saw your name." Daniel's heart pounded. His vision narrowed. A soft growl echoed low from the far shadows. Ray didn't hear it, but Daniel did. Ghost. The dog was hidden behind a broken storage shelf, tail still, ears back. A breathless statue of control. Not barking, not charging, waiting, watching. Ray stepped closer to Daniel, hand clenched tighter on the blade. "I spent 2 years watching the VA say there's no one to blame," Ray murmured, half to himself, half to the dead. "But someone has to answer. Someone has to pay. They said my boy had panic disorder. That it wasn't the drone. That it wasn't their fault. They buried my son with no name for the truth." Daniel's fingers curled around the frayed rope behind his back. "I didn't know your son," he said, voice quiet, brittle. "But mine came back broken too." Ray stopped. "What?" "Charlie," Daniel whispered. "Afghanistan. His leg's gone. He used to run track. Now he won't leave his room." Something in Ray's eyes faltered, just for a second. A blink of shared humanity in the haze. But then Ghost moved. It was a flicker, the subtle shift of weight in the dark, the moment a predator becomes kinetic force, the silence before the strike. Ray's eyes darted, sensing motion but unsure. He spun. Too late. A blur of black and tan leapt from the darkness, teeth bared not for flesh but for metal. Ghost didn't growl. He didn't bark. He collided with Ray's arm just as the box cutter lifted. The blade clattered across the concrete. Daniel shouted, "No!" Ghost's jaw locked on Ray's forearm, not puncturing deep, just enough to force surrender. Ray thrashed, but the dog held like a soldier trained not to kill, only to neutralize. Daniel kicked himself forward, gritting through the pain as he rolled toward the dropped blade. He reached it with numb fingers and began sawing at the rope. Ray struggled under Ghost's weight, wheezing. "I'm not trying to hurt you," Ray cried. Someone had to feel it. Daniel snapped the last strand, binding his wrists, and crawled over. "Ghost release." At the command, the first one in 2 years Ghost had heard from a human he trusted, the dog froze. Then, slowly, he stepped back. Ray curled into himself, shaking. Not from pain, but collapse. His anger had cracked. All that remained was grief, exposed like a raw nerve. "I buried him with his boots," Ray whispered, voice breaking. "I cleaned the blood from his dog tags, and they still said it wasn't enough proof to even get an inquiry." Daniel looked at him not with pity, but with something closer to what only another father might understand. Ghost moved beside Daniel now, his body forming a barrier between the two men. Silent, unblinking. Outside the building, engines idled under the rising wind. The snow had begun flakes drifting in sideways, hushed and steady. 2 unmarked SUVs parked under the shadow of the warehouse awning. Sheriff Eli stepped out first, face unreadable beneath his Stetson. Mara Chen followed, eyes scanning the structure. She held up a hand to halt the team behind her. "Wait," she said into her radio. "No breach. Not yet." A faint transmission crackled. "Thermal shows 3 heat sources. 2 close. 1 dog. We've got confirmation." Back inside, Ray sat slumped, his back against the crates. tears cutting through the grime on his face. Daniel knelt beside him, chest heaving. "I don't hate you," he said softly. "But you can't fix what's broken by hurting someone else." Ray didn't answer. His shoulders shook in silent collapse. Ghost stood between them, eyes tracking every twitch, every breath, like a sentinel assigned to both protect and forgive. Upstairs, the creak of old floorboards warned of someone's approach. Mara's voice came through again. "We have movement. Ghost is with the hostage." Eli nodded. "Then we go in. Quiet." The sharp bark broke the silence, like glass shattering on concrete. It wasn't frantic or panicked. It was sharp, focused, intentional. Ghost stood firm in the center of the basement, his ears forward, body rigid. His bark wasn't just a sound, it was a signal. Outside, through the swirling hush of snow and wind, the command moved like a whisper through radio comms. "Signal confirmed. Go." And SWAT breached quietly. No sirens, no drama, just boots crunching snow and silent gloved hands lifting rifles. Sheriff Eli, armored and steady, moved in behind them, his breath clouding the air. They'd trained for high-risk entries before, but this one carried weight. A child's life, a dog's loyalty, a reckoning. Inside the basement, Daniel blinked against the flickering light. Dried blood crusted his lips. His wrists ached, even after Ghost had gnawed through most of the rope. But he saw Ghost's stance and knew something had shifted. Help was near. The cold in his bones was still there, but it had company now. A flicker of hope. Upstairs, Ray Morton was moving erratically. He paced in tight circles, muttering names under his breath, people long dead or long gone. "She lied to me," Ray hissed. "Took my clearance, took my work. Said I wasn't stable. But what did she know? I kept the file. I knew the protocols. I knew what that dog was capable of." Then a thump. The basement door burst open. "Riverside SWAT," a voice thundered. "Come out with your hands up." Ray froze mid-step. His pupils shrank to pinpoints. Ghost didn't move. The man let out a low, ragged breath and reached toward his belt. Daniel stiffened, fearing another blade, another moment of madness. But Ray raised his arm slowly. "It's not what it looks like," he mumbled. "I was just protecting. He came here on his own, you know." The voices upstairs grew louder, more deliberate. Boots on wood. Ray's hands shook, fingers twitching like they couldn't decide whether to surrender or reach for ghosts of the past. Then he saw Ghost. A beat passed maybe less than a second, but in Ray's unraveling mind, it stretched. "You," he said hoarsely, pointing at the dog. "You weren't supposed to remember." Ghost didn't growl. He didn't bare his teeth. He simply stood there, like a monument to everything Ray had tried to erase. The SWAT team swept through the entry, securing the hallway. One agent moved past the door and trained his weapon on Ray, who stood trembling, still staring at the German shepherd. "Get down, on your knees," a voice ordered. Ray flinched, then obeyed, slowly, unwillingly. They cuffed him, and the fight in his shoulders seemed to slip away like steam off snow. Down in the basement, Ghost turned back to Daniel and pressed his nose gently into the boy's palm. Daniel laughed, a soft, broken sound. The kind of laugh that bubbles up not from humor, but relief too deep for words. "You waited," he whispered. "You never left me." The ropes around his wrists finally gave way with one last tug. His hands fell limp, and Ghost stayed by his side, like a soldier refusing to abandon post. The footsteps drew nearer. Sergeant Mara Chen was the first down the stairs. "Daniel," she said, breath catching. He looked up slowly. His lips were pale, eyes sunken, but they still held something clear. "Mara?" he croaked. "Yeah, it's me." She dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around him, careful not to crush his fragile body. "I didn't think," he began. "I know," she said, holding the back of his head. But Ghost did. Ghost sat beside them, silent, eyes fixed toward the stairs like he still didn't quite trust the comm. In the command van parked down the block, the monitor flickered with the body cam feed. It wasn't high definition. The light was dim, the angles rough, but Ivy saw it. Saw Ghost beside Daniel. Saw the stillness that wasn't just exhaustion, it was peace. She didn't cry, didn't cheer, She just leaned closer to the screen, hand pressed to her mouth, and whispered, "You did it." No one asked who she meant, Daniel or Ghost. They all knew. Outside, the snow was falling harder now. Thick, quiet flakes that landed with the hush of closure. Sheriff Eli stood at the perimeter, arms crossed as the medic team rolled in. "Get the boy to warmth first," he instructed. "Vitals, then transport." Mara emerged a minute later, supporting Daniel under one arm. Ghost walked alongside, close but never touching the kind of quiet proximity only the loyal understood. "He needs time," Mara said softly. "But he's safe." Eli nodded, voice low. "And the dog?" Ghost stopped and looked up at the sheriff, eyes steady. Not pleading, not proud, just present. "We ran his record," Mara replied. "His real one. He's not just some stray. He was RG-17. His handler was Elena Moore." Eli whistled low. "That was Black Ops. Deep Ghost file." "Fitting," Mara said. They all watched as Daniel was helped into the ambulance. Then Ghost did something none of them expected. He sat, right beside the rear tire of the ambulance, and waited. Like he had in the snow. Like he had in the shadows of that basement. A medic knelt to coax him in. Ghost hesitated just for a second, then leapt up into the back, curling beside Daniel like he belonged there. Because he did. Because he remembered. Because loyalty, the real kind, doesn't forget where it last left its heart. The ceiling was the same pale, institutional white, no matter where you were in the building. It didn't matter that this room had a window. The snow outside had turned the light blue and sallow, the way winter always did when hope felt thin. Daniel Cole lay in the hospital bed with his eyes open but unfocused. Tubes fed into his arms. Faint monitors blinked like lighthouses in fog. But nothing could measure the heaviness in his chest, the part of him that ached not from bruises or blood loss, but from absence. He was alone. Not a nurse in sight. Not a doctor hovering with charts or concerned furrows. Just the hollow hush of medical machinery and the sterile scent of antiseptic that clung to everything, even his skin. His hand moved slowly across the sheets, fingers trembling slightly from fatigue, or something deeper. They found his wrist, the one Ghost had licked clean, the one that still bore faint marks of the rope. He traced the skin, rough, scabbed, healing. "Ghost," he whispered, voice hoarse from days without speech. The name echoed in the quiet, then vanished, as if the room itself didn't dare speak it aloud. His mind wandered, no, not wandered. It returned. To the cellar, to the cold, to the flicker of breath that wasn't his, to the scratch at the door, and then the warmth of a tongue, so deliberate, so familiar, not frantic, not panicked, purposeful. Ghost had chosen him. "I didn't call for help," Daniel murmured, eyes blinking against the sting of memory. He came anyway. He could still feel the weight of Ghost's body pressed against his side after the ropes gave way. The way the dog had laid down, not barking, not pacing, just watching, guarding, breathing in rhythm with him like a soldier standing post at a fallen comrade's side. "He knew I was there," Daniel said, almost to himself. Knew before anyone else did. The monitor beside him beeped in time with his slowing heart rate. His eyes fell shut for a moment, and in that darkness, he was there again, back in the pit. But this time, the cold wasn't biting. It was warm. Ghost was there, sitting, waiting. The memory was clearer than dreams had any right to be. His head turned, instinctual. "You picked me." He whispered it like confession or prayer. The door clicked. Mara stepped in quietly, a clipboard against her chest. She froze when she saw his eyes open. "You're awake," she said softly. He nodded, then shifted in the bed, wincing. "How long?" he asked. 3 days since we pulled you out." He looked toward the window. "And Ghost?" There was a hesitation, subtle, but he caught it. "He's being evaluated," she said carefully. "Standard protocol after a field intervention. Ivy's with him." Daniel looked away. He didn't ask anything further. He just swallowed. "He found me," he said instead. "No GPS, no scent trail. Just you," she said. "He found you." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I don't want him registered as property evidence." "He's not," Mara assured him. "That conversation already happened. Ivy brought everything, medical files, deployment tags, even the old handler roster. He's got a name now, a file, and soon, if we can push it through, a home. Daniel glanced up. With me? He asked. She didn't answer. Not yet. Not until the forms cleared. But the look in her eyes was answer enough. Thank you, he said. You thank Ghost. He never left the basement until we breached. Wouldn't let the EMTs near you till he knew you were breathing. Daniel felt the tears come uninvited. He blinked hard, ashamed, until Mara stepped closer and placed a warm hand over his. He's not gone, she said, just being checked. But he knows. He was at the door of the animal unit all night. Didn't sleep, didn't eat. Daniel smiled faintly through the burn in his chest. Neither did I. They sat there a while, not speaking. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving behind a silvery hush over the parking lot and the pines beyond. A silence you could feel, not just hear. The kind of silence that said something important had passed through a storm, a rescue, a reckoning, and the world was holding its breath in the aftermath. Mara finally stood. I'll check on him. Tell him. Daniel stopped, voice thin, then, Tell him I remember. She nodded once, then turned to leave. But at the threshold, she paused. He didn't just choose you, she said. He waited for you. Then she left. Daniel looked up at the ceiling again. But now it wasn't just white. It had shape, color. The shadow of pine branches cast across it from the wind outside. He exhaled and let the quiet hold him. Not empty, just waiting. The sun dipped low behind the hospital, casting long shadows that clung to the walls like memories that refused to leave. Ivy stood at the edge of the tree line, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her fingers curled tightly around a bundle of cloth strips. Danny, in his flannel jacket and ball cap stained with years of paint and dog hair, stood beside her with a cold bucket of rotisserie chicken he'd picked up from the gas station deli. I still don't get why it has to be lavender, he muttered, handing her the first piece of warm meat wrapped in greasy paper. Because it's the only scent that never scared him, Ivy replied softly, tying one of the cloth strips to a low-hanging branch. The wind barely moved it. In the kennels, the vets would clean everything with alcohol or bleach, but I used lavender on my gloves. The first time he leaned in and didn't flinch, I knew. Danny fell quiet, watching her fingers tremble as she reached up to tie another strip to a stake she planted gently in the earth. The cloth bore faint stains, edges frayed, some torn from old pillowcases, others from a favorite hoodie. One, folded carefully and pinned with a dog tag, had belonged to Daniel, still holding the faintest hint of his scent. He's not lost, Ivy whispered again, this time more to herself. He's just waiting to be wanted. Danny nodded, his gaze drifting toward the forest ahead. The underbrush rustled softly with the breath of evening. Somewhere out there, a shadow of fur and memory moved through silence. They worked methodically, planting the pieces like breadcrumbs in a fable. The first scent Marker Lavender and Daniel's shirt was laid at the back of the hospital fence, where the last paw prints had been seen in the frost. From there, the trail meandered along the creek's edge, into the hollows where the earth still held damp footprints and the outline of a body that had once crawled its way to life again. The chicken came next, torn in half and left on flat stones. Ghost didn't trust kibble, but warm, meat-real, imperfect, torn by human hands, that meant something. That smelled like home. Remind me again why this dog matters so much, Danny asked, gently placing another piece of chicken beneath the branch of an old oak. Ivy paused. The sky was shifting now, a pale blue giving way to soft indigo. Her voice was barely louder than the wind. Because he came back, not for food, not for comfort, for Daniel. Danny swallowed. That man would have died in that basement. She didn't nod. She didn't need to. She pressed the final cloth strip into the bark of a dying elm tree and whispered beneath her breath, I know you're scared, but it's over now. Come home, Ghost. Please, just come home. Then she stood back, eyes damp, brushing the dirt off her palms. Farther away, in a cluster of bare-limbed pine trees, a shape shifted, low to the ground, ears twitching. He stayed still. The air was thick with unfamiliar sounds, but one scent-tone, impossible memory reached through the fog. Lavender. Ghost did not move yet, but his eyes blinked once. Then again. He remembered the warmth of a hand that never flinched, the sound of a laugh too soft to be threatening. The way she hummed when she cleaned his bandages. Lavender. Like safety. He had seen too much in too few years. Heard the cries of others like him. Some were never found. Some were punished for trusting. But she had never raised her voice. And she never called him it. He moved. One paw forward. Quiet as a feather touching water. Another. Then he stopped near a cloth strip that fluttered gently from the branch of a dogwood tree. He pressed his nose to it. Daniel. The scent was old. Faint. But it was him. The man who bled but never cursed. Who whispered through broken ribs, "I knew you'd come." Ghost closed his eyes. His ribs still ached. His paws were raw from asphalt and bramble. But the pain was a language he understood. It told him he was still alive, and that someone, somewhere, was still calling. Back at the car, Ivy didn't get in right away. She stood with the door open, eyes watching the dark. Danny offered her the last piece of chicken. She shook her head. That's for him. If he follows the trail, that's the end point. And what if he doesn't? Ivy closed the door slowly. Then I'll keep laying trails, every day, until he's ready. Danny leaned against the hood of the car, tired, but respectful. You believe in him that much? No, Ivy said, her voice fragile. I believe in what he believes in. Danny raised an eyebrow. Daniel, she added, and the way Ghost looked at him. Like he wasn't broken. Somewhere deep in the woods, Ghost nosed a torn piece of cloth, then sat beside it, silent as moonlight. He didn't howl, he didn't bark, but he didn't turn away, either. The scent stayed with him. The warmth of it wrapped around his chest like a quiet vow. Not yet home, but maybe. Not alone anymore. The wind crested softly over the ridgeline, brushing through the brittle pines like a whisper of memory. Snow fell in slow, deliberate flake-a-soft, but steady coating the ground below in a thin blanket of white that hadn't been there yesterday. The town of Alder Creek sat hushed in the distance, quiet as a held breath, its streetlights flickering like a string of scattered fireflies. Ghost stood just beyond the tree line, silhouetted against the pale dawn sky. His fur was matted in places, one ear torn at the edge, and his right front paw barely touched the ground still, favoring it from the chaos back at the warehouse. But his eyes, amber and unwavering, stayed trained on the rooftops and streets below, watching, listening, waiting. He didn't move at first. The scent on the wind carried faint traces, roasted chicken, crushed lavender, and something older, more human Daniel's shirt. Ivy had left the trail days ago, hoping, praying he would pick it up. She hadn't asked him to come back. She'd simply left the choice. That mattered to him, in a way only dogs understood, wordless, sacred, deeper than command. A jaybird shrieked and flew from the branch beside him. Ghost didn't flinch. His breath came in short clouds, visible in the cold. The burn in his leg was constant now, and his ribs ached from where Ray had kicked him. But it wasn't pain that kept him still. It was the weight of choice. Down there, in the town's quiet heart, people had started to believe in him. Or at least someone had. Not just Daniel. Not just the boy who whispered, "He picked me," from a hospital bed. Ivy. The girl who didn't flinch when he bared his teeth. The one who called him hero before anyone else dared. The one who was waiting now. From behind the trailhead, Ivy stepped into the clearing. Slowly. No sudden movements. She knew better. Her boots left soft impressions in the fresh powder. Her scarf tucked into her coat, gloves clutched in one hand. The cold made her cheeks pink, but her voice when it came was warm. Ghost. No commands. Just his name. Said like a promise. He blinked once, head tilting slightly. I don't want to train you, she said, voice barely above the hush of snowfall. I don't want to own you. I want you to know you belong, if you still want to. For a second, nothing moved. Then his tail twitched. She knelt, one knee sinking into the snow, letting the silence stretch between them like a thread. Her eyes brimmed but didn't fall. She didn't reach out. She didn't beg. She waited. Ghost took a step, then another. He limped slowly at first, wary and careful, testing the earth beneath him like it might give way. Then, as the scent of home grew stronger, lavender, chicken, and Daniel's flannel shirt mixed with the steadiness of Ivy's heartbeat broke into a lopsided run. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just went silent, focused, determined, until the space between them disappeared and he crashed into her arms with the full force of someone who hadn't been touched gently in a very long time. Ivy laughed through her tears, burying her face in the thick scruff of his neck. "You stubborn, beautiful boy," she whispered. "You found your way back." His breath was ragged against her coat, his chest heaving. But he stayed pressed against her, unmoving, like he needed the stillness more than air. From behind the slope, Danny stepped into view. His drone camera dangled from one glove. He paused at the edge of the clearing, watching the reunion unfold in reverent silence. For all his smart remarks and sarcastic asides, Danny didn't say a word. He simply raised his free hand to wipe his eyes. Down in Alder Creek, Daniel sat by the window in his hospital room. His face was pale, lips cracked, but he stared out the glass like it might deliver a miracle. The snow was falling heavier now, the kind that made everything look clean and untouched. He didn't speak. Then the door creaked open. Ivy entered quietly, brushing flakes from her shoulders. Behind her, soft footfalls, echoed pads, not shoes. Daniel turned, and Ghost limped in. Their eyes met boy and dog, and for one long, impossible moment, neither moved. Time folded. Then Daniel whispered, voice barely audible, "You came back." Ghost patted forward and laid his head in the boy's lap. Daniel's small fingers trembled before resting gently on Ghost's brow. Not possessive, just home. Ivy stepped back into the hallway, closing the door behind her. She leaned against the wall, eyes closed, listening to the silence inside. A kind of silence you only hear when something lost has finally been returned. The kind of silence that heals. And outside, as the snow fell without hurry, the town of Alder Creek settled just a little deeper into peace. The overhead light in the small gray room buzzed faintly, casting an anemic glow over the table where Ray Morton sat with his wrists shackled to a steel ring. His knuckles were bruised, the left one still bleeding from where Ghost had clamped down mercifully, not to maim, only to end the madness. His eyes, however, held no gratitude, only fatigue and something darker, burrowed deep like rust on old metal. Across from him sat Agent Sims, quiet, clean-cut, unflinching. A man used to watching monsters wear human skin. The silence between them stretched for minutes. Ray was the first to speak. "You people don't get it," he rasped. "You think this was just about a boy." Sims folded his hands over the case file. "Wasn't it?" Ray laughed, but there was no sound in it, just air and old grief. "Number, it was about restoration, about justice." "By kidnapping a child?" Ray's jaw twitched. "I didn't kidnap anyone. I accepted an offer. He came to me, said he knew what it felt like to lose everything, said he could help me fill the space she left." Sims leaned forward slightly. "Who's he?" Ray didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted to the one-way mirror. He drove a white van, no plates, said his name was only a name. Said real names don't matter when the world's abandoned you. "Where did you meet him?" "Down by the refinery exit. 2 a.m. I was leaving work. He was just there, like a ghost." Sims blinked at the word. Ray's gaze shifted again, briefly. "He knew about her. My daughter. Knew things no one should. Called her the one you buried with your heart. Said he could give me a second chance. All I had to do was wait. And then? A few weeks later, the child showed up. In my car. Sleeping like he belonged there. No bruises. No crying. Like he'd been told this was home now." Sims's brow furrowed. "You mean Daniel?" Ray didn't answer. Instead, he looked down at his hands, turning them as far as the cuffs allowed. He smiled at me. First thing he did. Same dimples. Same shape of the eyes. "You convinced yourself he was your daughter." "No," Ray said quietly. "I convinced myself he could be enough." Silence fell again. This time it wasn't strained, it was exhausted. Sims let it linger. Let Ray breathe in his own truth. Then he shifted, calm and low. "You said he offered the child. You mentioned others. What others, Ray?" Ray's throat moved. He looked up slowly. "There's a network. I don't know all the pieces. Just fragments. They call themselves the Replacement Initiative. Sounds noble, right?" He gave a thin smile. "But they don't just replace. They repurpose." Sims's fingers tapped once against the table. "What does that mean?" Ray swallowed. Some kids go to grieving parents like me. Others, they go to people who want children for other reasons. Sick reasons. He glanced down, jaw tightening. They catalog the lost, run backgrounds on the desperate. Then they match. Sims's voice dropped. How do they find the children? I don't know. They're ghosts. The man in the van, he said, we watch where others stop watching. You ever see him again? Ray shook his head. Only once. The day I buried the boy's birth certificate in the yard. He was across the street, watching, then gone. Sims stood, gathering the folder. We'll need you to sketch his face. I doubt it'll help, Ray said bitterly. He didn't have a face, just calm, like a priest without a god. As Sims turned to leave, Ray spoke again, this time with something more fragile in his voice. I never laid a hand on that boy, Agent. Not once. He was fed, warm. I read to him at night. He said I smelled like sawdust and soup. Sims paused at the door. You think that absolves you? Ray didn't look up. Number. But maybe he'll remember that part, not the chains. In the observation room, Ivy stood next to Daniel, watching the monitor through the glass. Her arms were folded, but her fingers trembled. That man in the van, she whispered. He knew where to find Daniel. Like he knew where to find any child who wouldn't be missed for a few hours. Beside her, Officer Cleary tightened his jaw. We've got someone tracing missing persons matched to towns Ray worked security in. This goes deeper than we thought. Ivy knelt beside Daniel, brushing his hair back gently. He leaned into her without hesitation. That trust given so easily again made her eyes sting. She whispered, You're not anyone's replacement. Daniel didn't speak, but he reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out something crumpled, a strip of cloth, lavender-scented, faded at the edges. He kept it, Ivy said, voice shaking. From the trail. Ghost's trail. Daniel didn't say a word, but he nodded. Back in the interview room, Ray slumped in the chair, alone again. The light flickered above him. His gaze drifted to the ceiling, unfocused. Then he closed his eyes, and, as if from someplace far outside these walls, a memory stirred. The sound of laughter. Small feet running through summer grass. A girl with braids holding a pine cone like treasure. Turning, calling, Daddy, look! Then gone. And for the first time, Ray wept. Quietly, hopelessly, for the wrong done, for the child who was never his, and the one he would never hold again. The air cracked with cold as frost, curled along the metal gate of what used to be the Cold Pine Scout Camp, a place once alive with summer laughter, now sunk into rot and silence. The long-abandoned welcome sign still stood, but its letters had peeled into a ghost of memory. Do your best. Agent Nolan Reyes stood at the threshold, coat tight at the collar, eyes narrowed behind dark-rimmed glasses. The man had a stillness about him, not the kind that comes from calm, but from calculation. He wasn't local. His boots were too clean, his stance too careful. But his eyes had seen too much. Behind him, federal vans rumbled in, kicking up frozen dirt. A team followed, quiet and alert. Some carried equipment. Others carried old ghosts. Nolan crouched beside the fire pit near the mess hall ruins, brushing aside frozen leaves. He found scorched plastic, not from marshmallows or burnt hot dogs. Something else. Something recent. His gloved hand paused over a melted toothbrush handle. Child-sized, pink with a faded unicorn still clinging to the curve. He pocketed it without a word. Sheriff Margaret Dorsey approached, breath clouding before her. This place gives me the creeps, she muttered, her eyes scanning the cabins. Been abandoned for years. Nolan didn't look up. Abandoned doesn't mean unused. He turned toward the map taped inside a binder one of his agents held out. You said Morton mentioned a van, he said, thumbing the pages. White, no plates, and someone who offered him. Margaret hesitated. A child. In exchange for silence, Nolan looked toward the woods, their skeletal branches trembling in the breeze. Who would make an offer like that? He asked, mostly to himself. And how many times has that offer been made? No one answered. The question hung there, heavy as snow on a bending bough. Inside one of the cabins, agents pried open loose floorboards. Below, a shallow dugout space revealed layers of trash food wrappers, tiny shoes, makeshift bedding. A flashlight beam landed on a water-damaged comic book, its pages crinkled but legible. Captain Courage number 7. The hero was drawn holding a child's hand, walking away from fire. One of the agents turned to Nolan. "Sir, this wasn't just storage. Someone lived down here. Someone small," another added. "Children." Nolan gave a short nod. "Photograph everything. Catalog it all. I want DNA samples from every scrap of cloth." He stepped outside, past the silence of the cabins. Cold Pines no longer felt like a place. It felt like a wound. A place where something had festered, then been buried. He found a rusted trail camera attached high on a pine tree. Odd, considering power had been cut off here years ago. He pulled out a portable scanner, swiped it across the base. Blinking green light. "Solar cell. Custom mount," he muttered. He called to one of the tech agents. "Pull the memory. I want images from the last 6 months." Margaret folded her arms. "We really think someone was running kids through here?" "Not someone," Nolan replied. "A system. Cold Pines was just a waypoint." Margaret frowned. "For what?" He glanced toward the tree line. "Strays." The word echoed cold and cutting. It was the word Ray Morton had used during interrogation, a word not meant for dogs, but for children. Forgotten ones. Ones no one would ask about. Nolan's voice was low. Kids without records. Lost in the cracks. Runaways. Foster care dropouts. The kind no one files a missing persons report for. Margaret looked down, lips pressed together. "We have 2 shelters within 50 miles that fit that description. Both overwhelmed. Underfunded. Check every intake file," Nolan said. "Every kid who disappeared or was released without follow-up. I want timelines, transfer orders, anything suspicious." Margaret hesitated. "This goes beyond your average trafficking ring, doesn't it?" Nolan's gaze was unreadable. "I've seen operations that move product, guns, drugs, money." He paused. "But this moves souls." He turned as an agent jogged over, handing him a tablet. On the screen, grainy black and white footage showed timestamps. Movement flickered across the forest, clearing people, mostly small figures. One frame paused on a hunched child climbing into the back of a white van. Nolan stared. Timestamp is 3 weeks ago, after the camp was supposed to be empty. Margaret's hand tightened on her belt. "That kid's still alive?" Nolan didn't answer right away. He tapped the screen, zooming in on the van's back window. A handprint, small, pressed hard against the glass, as if someone was trying to leave part of themselves behind. Then he said quietly, "I don't know." "Ugh." A hawk cried in the distance, circling overhead. Back at the perimeter, Ivy stood near the police tape, coat too big for her frame, hands in pockets. She watched as the FBI marked off the site, watched as Nolan Reyes gave orders like a surgeon trying to cut out rot without killing the body. She didn't know his name, but something in her recognized the way he looked at the world, not with hope, but with refusal. A refusal to look away. Beside a hair, Ghost stood still, his ears forward, body taut. But his tail didn't wag. It hadn't since they arrived. Ivy knelt. "You remember this place, don't you?" Ghost didn't move, but his eyes stayed fixed on the cabins. She whispered, more to herself than to him, "You weren't just trying to escape, you were trying to bring someone back." Behind them, Nolan Reyes turned, finally noticing the girl and the dog. His gaze lingered not just curiosity, but something deeper, a question forming, a thread beginning to pull. He would ask her name soon. He would learn the truth behind that dog. But for now, he turned back to his team. "Start digging," he said. "This isn't just Cold Pines anymore. This is a crime scene, and maybe the key to stopping something bigger." Snowflakes began to fall again, slow and soft, as if trying to cover what had been found. But the earth does not forget, and neither does Ghost. The projector hummed quietly in the dim conference room of the sheriff's office. Dust floated like flecks of memory through shafts of early morning light slicing in from the blinds. On the wall, a thermal map lit up in dull oranges and pale blues, overlaid with jagged red lines, routes that twisted through dense woods, abandoned hunting roads, and broken trails long swallowed by pine needles and time. Ivy stood at the front, one hand resting gently on Ghost's ruff. The dog sat beside her, calm now, watchful, his ears slightly cocked at every voice. His coat still showed signs of brambles, scratches, and dried mud, but his posture was resolute, like he'd claimed the space as his mission. Sheriff Maynard leaned against the table, arms crossed, face drawn with the weight of everything that had led to this moment. Beside him, Agent Nolan Reyes flipped through a stack of satellite printouts, each one annotated in Ivy's small, determined handwriting. The FBI agent hadn't said much since arriving. He had the air of someone who had seen too much and trusted too little, but his eyes stayed fixed on the data like it might blink first. "This," Ivy said, tapping a red-dotted line that veered sharply north, "was his first path, right after the incident at the warehouse. Crossed 2 creeks and a barbed fence," Danny chimed in from the back, chewing the edge of his pen. "We found hair fibers and a few paw prints about a mile out. No human footprints near him." Reyes raised an eyebrow. "He was alone?" Ivy nodded. "For days. But he wasn't wandering. He was circling." She clicked again. Another map loaded this time, marked with layered routes. Green lines for patrol scans. Blue for search and rescue trails. But the red ghost's path wove through them like thread through a needle, hitting points none of the others had. "He was mapping," she said softly. "Making sense of the woods in ways we couldn't. Ems." The sheriff stepped forward, running a hand down his jaw. "We think he was trying to find where they went." Reyes glanced at Ivy. "They?" Ivy hesitated, then pulled a folded paper from her back pocket, worn at the edges, dog-eared and rain-stained. It was a child's map, hand-drawn in crayon. This was Cole's. He drew it the night before the abduction, said it was a safe path out of camp. She unfolded it, laying it beside the thermal overlays. The similarities were eerie. Not exact, but unmistakable in intention. Landmarks matched, hidden trails aligned, a hollowed sycamore tree near the creek bed, a cabin with one broken window, a slope marked, "Don't run here." "Ghost followed this," Ivy said, voice trembling a little. "Not because he saw it, because he felt it." Silence settled over the room, thick and reverent. Sheriff Maynard cleared his throat, trying to steady what emotion had cracked the air. "He's not just our witness. He's our tracker." And Reyes finally sat back in his chair, his fingers steepled before his mouth, gaze fixed on the map. "This isn't just instinct. This is strategy. Or memory," Ivy said, stroking Ghost behind the ear. The dog leaned into it slightly, but his eyes never left the screen. Danny leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "The camp's topography makes it a perfect blind spot. The forest loops in on itself. Kids could disappear 5 minutes from the main road, and no one would know." "Huh?" "And if someone knew those loops," Maynard added, "they could vanish without a trace," Reyes finished grimly. He stood, walked to the screen, and traced Ghost's path with a knuckle. "This trail here, it ends right at Cold Pine's south boundary." Ivy stepped forward and nodded. "That's where he was limping the worst. I think he found something and circled back to lead us." "And we missed it," Danny muttered. "No," Reyes said. "We weren't ready to see it. He was." End of 4. Outside the window, the wind stirred the pines. A crow landed on the roof's edge, called once, and flew on. The map glowed silently on the wall, pulsing with heat and color as if breathing. Ghost let out a low, quiet whine. Ivy looked down. "What is it, boy?" she asked. Ghost stood, walked slowly to the far end of the room, nose close to the floor, then stopped right beneath the pinned corkboard holding old missing persons flyers. He looked up at one photo in particular, a girl with freckles and braces. Her name was Lily May, gone since 2017. The room stilled. Sheriff Maynard stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "That's Cold Pines again." Reyes moved to his side. "You think he remembers her?" Ivy knelt beside Ghost, her hand on his chest. "He never forgets. That's the thing with dogs like him. They carry everything." She rose slowly, turning to face them. "So do we." "Oh." Reyes looked back at the map, then to the wall of faces. "Then let's follow his trail." Ghost sat back down, tail thumping once against the wood floor. His eyes held something unshakable. Not triumph, not fear. Purpose. He was ready. And this time, they'd go with him. The forest was thick with snow, its silence heavy listening, not empty. Even the wind dared not stir too loudly. In that hush, Ranger moved first. No bark, no command, Just a quiet, sure step forward, his body alert, his eyes scanning, ears twitching like they were tuned to another frequency. He paused every few steps, not because he was unsure, but because he was listening to something no one else could hear. The golden brown of his coat was powdered white, blending into the land like he belonged more to this wilderness than to the people behind him. Daniel followed, not as leader but as believer. This was no longer his mission, it was Ghost's Rangers. Behind them came Ivy, Agent Reyes, Sheriff Colburn, and 2 tactical officers, each one quiet in their movements, like they understood the moment demanded reverence. They weren't in charge. Not really. The dog was. "He's reading the ground," Ivy murmured. Daniel's voice was softer still. "Number he's remembering someone." Ranger's nose dipped near a frozen creek, not because of the cold, but because someone had passed through here, not hours ago, minutes. Daniel crouched near him. No words, just presence. Ghost calmed when Daniel was close enough to keep going, enough to trust the way forward. Then, Ranger veered off the trail. No tracks, just untouched snow, but something beneath told him, this is the way. A whisper of weight, a half-buried breath. "He's picking a path we can't see," Ivy said. "Or one someone tried to erase," Reyes added. They followed him into darker woods, taller trees. Colburn muttered, "No cell signal here." "Not an accident," Ivy replied. Ranger froze, not in fear, in warning. Daniel raised a hand. Everyone stopped. It wasn't just quieted, was held breath. Ranger backed away from a thicket of brambles, not growling, not attacking, just circling, calculating. "He smells something," Daniel whispered. "But this isn't how we go in." They followed his lead, circling too. He led them to a low, half-sunken structure, covered in pine. A hatch. Rusted. Broken lock. Inside, someone had been hiding. Ranger didn't need to be told. He simply knew. And with each step, the air thickened, like they were entering not a room but a scar, long buried. They found a second trail this time to a collapsed hunting cabin, and behind it, a white van buried in snow. Ivy reached out to steady herself against a tree. Her voice caught in her chest. Ghost no longer just a K9, but something more stood still. Eyes locked, fur bristling, not barking, just feeling. "That it?" Reyes asked. "Plates match," one deputy confirmed. Van was reported stolen. No owner, no tax record. Just like before. Daniel crouched next to Ghost, his voice barely a whisper. "You've been here, haven't you?" Ghost didn't bark. He growled, low, from deep within. Then, with a sharp breath, he barked once. Not a detection, a warning. "That's not his normal signal," Reyes muttered. "Something's wrong." Ghost moved toward the van it charging, not flinching, just walking with the caution of something remembering what pain felt like. The team followed. The van was empty of people, but not of memory. Duct tape, candy wrappers, a crate, a heater, long, cold, but no child, no sound. Then from the cabin, a creak. A voice followed. "I told him to leave her." A man stepped from the shadows, pale, twitchy, ordinary in all the worst ways. He knelt before Reyes, hands raised. "I didn't touch her. We just delivered. That's all we do." "We?" Ivy asked, voice like glass. He hesitated. "He has the others, the ones they didn't want." "M?" Reyes moved fast, barking coordinates into his radio. "We need backup, now." But Ghost didn't wait. He turned not toward the van but toward the back of the cabin, and ran. Daniel followed instantly. Ivy just behind. There, just beyond a line of dying spruce, they saw the second man, running. Ranger lunged. Deputies followed. The takedown was quick, efficient, but the real shock came when they rolled up the man's sleeve. 3 arrows. A broken triangle. The same symbol etched into the collars they'd found in unmarked shelters, in places no one ever questioned. Reyes stared, jaw tight. They're all connected, every single one. Ghost didn't celebrate. He returned to the van and waited. His body was still, but his eyes weren't. He was searching. Not for threats, for them. Inside, he moved first. Through a cloth partition. into the dark. Ivy reached out. Ghost. But he was gone. Seconds later, he whined. Daniel and Ivy climbed in. The air inside smelled like ammonia and fear. A pile of blankets, crates, and behind them a bundle. 2 children, huddled, silent, barely breathing. A boy. A girl. Maybe 9, maybe younger. They didn't cry. Didn't speak. Just looked. Wide-eyed. Still. Ghost approached, slowly, lowering himself as if to say, "You're safe now." He nudged the boy, then licked his cheek. Once, the boy didn't flinch. He breathed, like someone had given him permission. The girl buried her face in her sleeves. Then she wept. Ivy climbed in, dropping beside them. "Oh my God." Daniel stayed at the edge, hand on the van's frame. His breath caught, not in panic, in awe. Reyes relayed into his radio. "We've got 2 minors. EMS priority. Repeat, we have survivors." Ghost curled his body around them like a shield. The boy reached for his fur. Not petting, just contact. Proof that this was real. Proof that someone had come. Outside, the storm was breaking. Snow still fell, but softer now. The trees no longer bristled. The forest felt lighter. Daniel stood with Ivy and Ghost as paramedics arrived. The children were safe. The men arrested. The evidence gathered. But Ghost remained still, his eyes not on the van anymore, but the woods. Listening. Always listening. Reyes approached, voice quiet. "We'll run everything. Get this network torn apart. But this dog," he looked at Ghost, "he didn't just find victims. He brought home the ones who were almost forgotten." Daniel placed a hand on Ghost's shoulder. "He never needed orders. Just a reason." Ivy knelt beside them. "And a promise." The forest exhaled, and somewhere between the snow and silence, the world shifted. Because sometimes it takes a dog with a scarred body and an unbroken heart to teach people how to see. Ghost lay beside the van as night fell, guarding not just the rescued, but something deeper. The space where silence became sanctuary. The wind moved again. But this time, it didn't sound like mourning. It sounded like gratitude. "Ivy," Daniel finally said, barely above a whisper. "He found them." She nodded, unable to answer. Her throat was thick with emotion. She'd spent the last 3 nights hoping, praying, that Ghost's instincts hadn't been dulled by trauma or time, that he hadn't lost his way, or worse, his will to trust. But now, here he was, curled beside the very heart of the mystery, like he'd never left it. Ivy knelt beside the girl. "Hey, sweetheart, my name is Ivy. You're safe now, okay?" The girl nodded slowly, lips pressed into a hard line that kept trying to tremble. She clutched a threadbare plushie to her chest, something small and pink and missing an ear. She didn't speak, but her eyes locked on Ghost as if he were some dream she was afraid might fade if she blinked. "What's your name?" Ivy asked gently. "Emma," came the whisper. Then pointing to the boy, "That's Liam." "Emma. Liam." Her voice cracked, but she steadied it. "We're going to take you someplace warm, with food, and beds, and people who know how to help." Liam didn't speak, just pressed his forehead against Ghost's shoulder. "Where's the man?" Reyes asked Ivy quietly. "The one who brought them here." Ivy shook her head. "He ran. Probably when he heard Ghost bark, but it doesn't matter now. Not yet." They knew there would be questions, investigations, trials, more trauma. But for now, there was this moment, fragile, real, holy, in its own quiet way. Daniel stepped inside the van, crouched beside Ghost, and finally spoke. "Good boy," he said, not as a handler, but as something more sacred, like a benediction. "You brought them back." Ghost turned to him, tail thumping once on the floor, his breath soft and warm in the cold air. Then he lay down, as if only now, after days of silence and sleepless nights, he could finally rest. Outside, the other officers moved with purpose, cordoning the area, prepping stretchers, radios crackling with codes. But inside the van, time had slowed. The snowfall outside thickened, muting the world, turning branches to lace. Ivy looked at the children again, 2 lives nearly lost in a system that called them strays. Uncounted. Forgotten. But Ghost had counted them. Ghost had remembered. And somehow, that had made all the difference. She reached over and touched the boy's hair gently, brushing away a clump of dried leaves. "You're safe now," she whispered again. Behind them, one of the medics peeked in. "We're ready," he said. "Let's get them warmed up." Emma clutched Ivy's hand. "Can he come too?" "Ghost?" Ivy asked. The girl nodded. "Of course," Ivy said softly. "He's family now." As the medics lifted the children out of the van, Ghost followed without command. No leash, no orders, just instinct and devotion. Liam kept one hand buried in the fur at his side, and Emma walked with her eyes fixed on his silhouette. The snow was falling harder now, but no one seemed to mind. For the first time in days, the cold didn't feel cruel, it felt like a fresh start. As they reached the ambulance, Daniel looked back at the empty van. The dark, the silence it left behind. "Not just a witness," he murmured, "not just a tracker." Ivy stood beside him, her voice full of quiet awe. "He's our bridge between the lost and the found." And with that, the doors closed, and the world moved forward one breath, one heartbeat, one miracle at a time. The town square had never been this still. It wasn't the stillness of fear, but one born of reverences oft like snowfall over grief. The storm had passed, literally and otherwise, but its memory lingered in the way neighbors now looked longer, nodded slower, held their children closer. An old pine stage had been set in front of the firehouse, wrapped in cedar garlands and flickering yellow lights. The crowd was modest locals bundled in mismatched scarves. Ivy stood to the side, hands wrapped around a steaming cup she didn't sip. Sheriff Calder had his hat in hand, and Daniel stood in the center, scout uniform snug at the wrists. Beside him sat Ghost. The German shepherd was scarred but composed. A healing gash marked his chest, but his posture was calm, watchful, still listening, still guarding. Mayor Jean, voice like turning pages, stepped to the mic. "There are no speeches today," she said, "because words don't stretch far enough for what we've seen and what we've been saved from." A cardboard sign lifted in the crowd. "Thank you, Ghost." Jean knelt, opening a small velvet box. Inside, a brass tag, engraved by Ivy. "The last sentinel of Winterdale," she read. Daniel stepped forward, voice trembling. "Ghost, you've always protected me. Now, everyone knows. So, do you accept the call again?" Ghost tilted his head, then barked one slow, sharp, certain. No applause followed. Just a ripple of awe and quiet joy. Daniel fastened the new blue collar around Ghost's neck. The tag caught the light. Ivy wiped a tear. She wasn't alone. The sheriff murmured, "Dog like that, you don't find twice." Ghost scanned the crowd. A clapping toddler. An old man nodding. And then he paused at Ivy. She stepped forward, whispering, "Thank you." He didn't move, but his ears twitched. He'd heard her. As the crowd dispersed, Daniel and Ghost stayed behind. Snow fell soft and quiet. Ivy approached, crouching beside them. "You two look like you've been through a war." Daniel nodded. "We have." She traced the tag gently. "He's earned this." "He always was earning it," Daniel whispered. "We just finally noticed." From behind, Agent Reyes stepped forward, suit sharp, eyes softened. "The network's down," he said. "What you uncovered goes beyond this town. And this dog, he's now part of a federal report. Protocol's gonna change." He paused. "But no paperwork explains what he did." "No," Ivy said. "He saved souls." Ghost rose and made a slow circle of the square, nose low, like checking one last time. Then he returned to Daniel's side and sat quiet, steady, the last sentinel. The old library had been reborn, painted forest green, a carved sign above the door. Second watch. For those still listening. Inside smelled of sawdust, oatmeal, and something softer, trust. Children played, laughter folding into the room like sunlight. Dogs weaved through cushion tunnels. Ghost sat in the center knot, leading, just there, like a lighthouse for fragile hearts. A small girl, dragging a blanket, approached him. She didn't speak yet, but touched his paw. Ghost lowered his head, gently nudging her hand. She smiled. Ivy, watching, felt her throat catch. The program had begun from a pencil note in an old file. Some strays don't want to be rescued. They want to be of use. Ivy had pinned that above her desk for weeks. Now, it lived and breathed. Here. Daniel arrived with a box of vests, bright orange, labeled Second Watch Trainee. Children swarmed him. Ghost didn't move. "We'll need more of those," Ivy said. "At this rate, we'll run out of strays before vests." "I wish that were true," she replied. Her gaze drifted to Ghost. "He's holding them together, and they don't even know why." At the far corner, an older boy whispered into a dog's ear. The dog leaned closer. "You remember how Ghost was at first?" Ivy asked. Daniel smiled. "Slept facing the door, always waiting for orders that weren't coming." Now, a toddler draped a blanket over Ghost's head like a cape. He didn't flinch. "So what's next?" Daniel asked. "Phase 2, Ivy replied. "We train the kids to train the dogs." Daniel blinked. "You mean?" "They heal each other. We just keep the gates open." Later, outside, Ivy stepped into the cold. The light softened over cocoa mugs forgotten on picnic benches. From behind her, "Miss Ivy?" It was the blanket girl. No blanket, just a piece of paper. "I drew him," she whispered. "Ghost." The crayon drawing was rough, but honest. Ghost. Eyes 2 different browns, stars behind him. And in jagged letters, "He listens even when no one else does." Ivy knelt, heart slowing. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl looked down. "Elora." "Well, Elora, that's the best drawing I've ever seen." From inside, Ghost barked on sharp, clear, calling the children. Elora giggled and ran. Ivy stood still, clutching the drawing. Maybe it was more than paper. Maybe it was hope. Inside, dogs and children buzzed. Not perfect, never perfect, but purposeful. And in the middle, Ghost. Not guarding the past anymore, watching over what came next. Evening blanketed Winterdale in blue. Snow drifted lazily. Ivy sat on the porch of her cabin, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, cardigan pulled tight. She didn't look up when Daniel joined her, didn't have to. Ghost lay nearby, half asleep, half listening. The snow caught in his fur. His breathing was steady. Earned peace. Daniel stared at his gloved hands. "It still doesn't feel real," he said. "You mean it's over?" Ivy asked softly. "Number that he came back? That he still knew me?" She took a sip. "Some dogs remember more than we think. Some people forget more than they should." Ghost stirred at a distant sound, then rested again. "You think he stayed alive just to come back?" "Maybe he wasn't just surviving," Ivy said. "Maybe he had something left to do." "Like what?" She met his eyes. "Maybe he's finishing what Elena started." The name landed with the weight of memory. Elena, who believed in second chances, in stray dogs, in forgotten boys. "She always said he chose who to trust," Daniel murmured. "And he chose you." Again. They fell into silence, the kind that held gratitude, not pain. "You remember what she called him?" Ivy asked. Daniel nodded. "Her shadow. She said shadows stay close, even when the light's gone." Ghost patted over and nudged Daniel's knee. Daniel scratched behind his ears. "He never needed words," Daniel whispered. "He just knew." Ivy smiled. "Some of us spend our lives trying to understand each other. He just does." A gust of wind. Another silence. Ivy stared into the darkening trees. "He stayed," she said, "to make sure it never happens again. The camps, the vans, the missing. Someone had to draw the line." Daniel looked at Ghost, and he did. The dog leaned against him content, knowing. The snow fell heavier, but the silence wasn't empty anymore. "I should go inside," Ivy said, rising. Daniel remained. Ghost didn't follow, just curled up again like a sentinel in his final post. At the door, Ivy paused. "For a long time, I thought we lost everything when she died." "And now?" Daniel asked. She smiled, small, tired, true. "Now I think she left us exactly what we needed. We just had to grow into it." She disappeared into the warm glow of the cabin. Daniel sat a little longer. Not long, just enough to feel the snowfall, to feel the dog by his side. And for the first time in a long time, the silence felt warm. The badge was subtle, a small silver insignia etched into the corner of Ghost's new vest, but it meant everything. Daniel had insisted on it. Not for recognition, not even for symbolism, but because something in him knew. Ghost had earned it. The town of Winterdale was still quiet that morning, the kind of quiet only snow can bring. Thick flakes fell like memory, softening the edges of roofs, fences, footsteps. And through the white hush came two figures. Daniel, steady in his gait, and beside him, ghost fur brushed, eyes focused, vest snug against his shoulders. A new patch stitched above the heart read, K9 Unit, Winterdale PD. Just below it, a smaller tag gleamed, The Last Sentinel. They moved in sync, not as officer and asset, but as something older, deeper, a rhythm of trust that needed no leash. The first to spot them was Mrs. Lynn from the bakery. She stepped out into the cold, wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron, and waved with both arms. "There's our boy," she called. Ghost didn't break stride, but his tail swayed once a gesture as controlled as it was affectionate. He remembered her. She'd left scraps out behind the bakery during the early days, when trust was still an uncertain thing. Children came next. First one, then three, then a small stampede of bundled-up coats and scarves giggling as they ran. Ghost. "Hey, Ghost. Do the turn. Do the turn." And as if on cue, Ghost spun in a slow, full circle before trotting forward again. A move Ivy had taught him during therapy sessions originally for trust, now repurposed as joy. Daniel smiled. Not just because the kids laughed, but because Ghost had chosen to respond on his own terms. No command, just memory. They passed by the old lumber yard, now converted into a dog training ground. A banner still hung at the gate. Second Watch Trust can be taught. Ivy's project was thriving. Ghost had visited there often since the rescue, lying among the pups, letting them climb over him, correcting only with a glance. He wasn't just a face for the program. He was the soul of it. As they continued toward Main Street, Daniel glanced down at him. "You good?" he murmured. Ghost gave no bark, no sound, but his eyes turned upward for half a second. That was answer enough. A man stepped aside to let them pass near the post office. He wore a dark coat and mirrored sunglasses, his hand resting near the edge of his belt. For a moment, something in Ghost's stance shifted, subtle but unmistakable. A pause, a recentering, watching. Daniel nodded once to the man, polite but firm. Ghost's shoulder brushed his leg again. Pressure, grounding. They moved on. Ghost's senses were always alert, but not in panic. It was a discipline honed from grief, reshaped by healing. Every sound, a question. Every movement, a clue. And every child's laugh, a reason. Near the church, old Reverend Mahoney tipped his hat. "Back on the beat, eh, Ghost?" he said with a chuckle. Ghost paused, just for a breath, then walked forward again. Behind them, someone whispered, "That dog saved my niece. He knows things." Daniel didn't turn around. He didn't have to. He could feel the town slowly stitching itself back together, thread by thread, around the presence of a four-legged sentinel who never needed words. At the end of the route, Daniel knelt in the snow just outside the town square. He didn't say much, didn't need to. He just reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small biscuit, letting it rest on his open palm. Ghost didn't lunge for it. He waited, eyes locked on Daniel's. Then slowly, deliberately, he stepped forward, nudged Daniel's hand with his snout, and took the treat. A few kids clapped. Daniel rubbed behind his ear gently, like it was sacred. "You remembered every step," he whispered. The snow thickened. A car passed in the distance. Somewhere, a wind chime danced. And Ghost sat beside him, eyes half closed, ears tuned to the world, watching, waiting. His patrol wasn't just perimeter. It was presence. It was memory. And in that stillness, Daniel realized something. Ghost didn't walk with them just because he was trained. He walked with them because he chose to. Because somewhere in the silence of that long winter, when no one else was listening, Ghost had heard the town calling, and he'd answered. As they walked back toward the station, Daniel glanced over his shoulder, just once. Snow was falling heavier now, soft and slow like ash from a fire long extinguished. But this time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt warm. The storm had long passed. Not just the one that swept through the pines and roads of Winterdale, but the kind that lived inside Sheriff Eli Morgan's chest-unrelenting, silent, and not always visible. Now, with the quiet hum of the heater beside his desk and the dim lamp casting a soft glow across yellowed reports, he reached for the last folder of the day. The heading read simply, Operation Ghost. He opened the file slowly, fingers pausing a moment over the first page. Snow drifted against the frosted window outside, catching light like falling ash. The town had settled into winter again, but everything was different now. The air carried a hush that wasn't fear anymore, it was reverence. He scribbled down final notes in his usual block handwriting. The report was methodical at first. Dates, GPS coordinates, suspect names, body cam footage cross, referenced with patrol logs. But somewhere along the way, the words shifted, became slower, more human. He tapped the end of his pen against the desk once, then again, then let the pen fall from his fingers entirely. He looked toward the door. Ghost had been lying there earlier, in his usual spot by the heater, one ear up, one paw stretched forward like a sentinel at ease. But the German shepherd was out no one patrol with Daniel. They'd passed Eli earlier that morning. Ghost had worn his vest like he remembered how it used to fit. But there was something else in his gait now. Not burden, not duty, just belonging. Eli picked up the pen again and stared at the final line. The words didn't come all at once. They came, slowly, like truth easing its way into the room. He wrote, "Some heroes wear fur, some never speak, but they never stop listening." He leaned back, rereading it once, twice, then again, and realized he didn't need to add anything more. No tactical summaries, no citations. The truth didn't always need witnesses when it sat that heavy in the heart. Outside, someone laughed of the children running down Main Street, trailing behind the sound of a familiar bark. Ghost. There was no mistaking it. Eli smiled faintly, eyes drawn again to the window. Footprints already traced the sidewalk in front of the station's mall ones, scattered, bounding like joy had returned, and refused to be quiet about it. He stood, the old leather of his chair creaking beneath him, and walked to the coat rack. His badge still hung where he'd left it, the polished brass catching the light. Eli hadn't worn it much lately, not because he'd stopped serving, but because sometimes the best kind of leadership came in quiet presence, not command. As he pulled on his coat, he noticed something new beneath the rack. A tag small, silver, worn just enough to look lived in. It read, "The Last Sentinel of Winterdale." He picked it up gently, thumb brushing over the engraved letters. The tag had been meant for Ghost. A ceremonial piece, they said. Ivy had ordered it. Daniel had attached it to the display in Town Hall, but Ghost had never needed it to know who he was. Eli held the tag for a moment longer, then slipped it into his pocket. He stepped outside. The cold met him like an old friend, and for the first time in months, he didn't brace against it. Across the street, Daniel stood in front of the bakery, talking with Mrs. Albright. Ghost sat beside him, not tense, not distracted, just there, watching, breathing, listening. A little girl, May, the baker's niece, ran up to him, scarf trailing behind like a comet. She reached out, giggling, and wrapped her arms around Ghost's neck. He didn't flinch, just turned his head slightly and let her lean in. Daniel didn't speak. He just looked at Eli and nodded once. It was enough. Eli turned, heading toward the diner. The bell above the door chimed with a warmth he hadn't realized he'd missed. Ivy was there, stirring a pot of coffee, humming to herself. She looked up, eyes softening. "Coffee?" she asked. He nodded. "And a quiet seat, if you've got one." She poured the coffee and set it down without a word, then sat across from him. They didn't speak for a while. Outside, the snowfall began again. Gentle, relentless, beautiful. Eli sipped his coffee and glanced toward the tag in his pocket. Then, at Ivy. "You think they know?" he asked. "Who?" she said. "The kids, the town, what he did." Ivy looked toward the window. where Ghost had now sat at Daniel's feet, watching the street as if it still held secrets worth guarding. "They don't need to know everything," she said. "They just need to know they're safe, that someone's still watching." Eli nodded. He didn't need to say it, but he felt it deep and wordless and steady. Ghost hadn't come to Winterdale to stay. He came to finish something. And somehow, in the quiet between footsteps, in the flick of an ear or the stillness before a storm, he'd reminded them of something they'd forgotten, that love doesn't always speak, that healing doesn't always announce itself, and that sometimes the truest kind of sentinel doesn't wear stars or titles. It just listens. And it never leaves its post. There was something about the first light, the way it filtered through the trees like an old memory returning home. Ivy had always loved this hour. It held no judgment, only stillness, just the hush of breath against frost, the promise of another day quietly unfolding. She stood barefoot on the porch, a worn shawl wrapped around her shoulders, steaming mug in hand. The snow had stopped in the night, leaving a soft quilt over the earth. Even the wind didn't stir. Just quiet. That kind of quiet. You feel more than hear. Her eyes drifted toward the edge of the woods, to a shape she'd learned to look for without meaning to. Ghost. He sat beneath the old cedar tree, the same one he had once curled under that first day, gaunt and uncertain, guarding nothing but his own heartbeat. But today he sat tall, chest out, head high. His fur shimmered like pewter in the rising sun, and the tag on his collar caught a sliver of morning light. The last sentinel of Winterdale. He wore the name now like he had always meant to. Ivy stepped off the porch, her slippers crunching the powder. She didn't call to him. Didn't have to. There were no commands between them, not anymore. Just understanding like the kind that sits between two old souls who've endured too much and said too little. When she reached him, Ghost didn't move. She lowered herself slowly, the way people do when they know something sacred is unfolding. Her knees pressed into the snow, but she didn't mind the cold. Not this morning. Ghost blinked once, then again. His ears twitched as she reached out a hand, and without a word, he leaned in. Her fingers found the soft place behind his ear, and she let them rest there not to comfort him, but to anchor herself. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, a whisper. "You came home!" Ghost didn't bark. He didn't lick her face like he did with the children. He just leaned, as if that quiet pressure of his body against hers was the only answer she needed. And maybe it was. Because Ghost had never needed language. He was language. In the way he stood between danger and innocence. In the way he chose to stay when he could have run. In the way he carried a broken man back from the edge, not by force, but by simply not leaving. That's how healing happens, she thought. Not in loud declarations or grand gestures, but in the quiet choices we make when no one's watching. Like kneeling in the snow beside someone who never asked for saving. She glanced up at the sky. The clouds had begun to part, slivers of gold pouring through like long-forgotten warmth. Somewhere behind them, she imagined Elena smiling, maybe even laughing, that soft, knowing laugh of hers that always came before a hard truth. "Maybe he's not just here for you," Ivy had told Daniel once. "Maybe he's finishing what Elena started." But today, under that old cedar, Ivy knew something else. Ghost wasn't finishing a mission. He was beginning something new. Behind them, the town of Winterdale was waking. A bell rang faintly from the church steeple. Someone scraped a shovel across a wooden porch. A child's voice called out, probably for Ghost, but the sound softened before it reached the trees. Ivy exhaled. The air clouded in front of her, then vanished. She looked back at Ghost. "You know," she murmured, her voice almost lost to the breeze. "I think Daniel needed you, but so did we. All of us." Ghost tilted his head slightly. Not to answer, just to listen. Like he always did. For a long moment, they stayed there, a woman and a dog beneath a tree that had watched too much grief, and now, finally, bore witness to something gentler. The snow didn't melt, but it didn't feel cruel anymore. Not like before. Not like that first night. When Ivy finally stood, Ghost rose with her. They turned together, slow and deliberate, and walked back toward the porch. He didn't lead or follow, just stayed at her side, step for step, their footprints a mirrored trail in the white. As they climbed the steps, she paused. "Come on, Ghost," she whispered. touching the doorframe the way her mother used to a gesture of return, of gratitude. "Let's go home." Inside, the kettle whistled softly, the kind of sound that reminded her life was still here, still unfolding, still worth noticing. Ghost padded to his spot near the window, circled once, and lay down the badge still stitched to his vest, the tag still gleaming at his throat. Ivy sat in her chair and pulled a blanket over her lap. She didn't speak again. She didn't have to. Outside, the town of Winterdale stirred. And beneath the cedar tree, the snow fell quiet now, not cold, just quiet, like a promise that had been kept, like a sentinel still standing watch, like home. Some stories don't need many words to be remembered. Just a quiet bark, a soft gaze, or a presence that never leaves your side. If you've ever known the loyalty of a German Shepherd, you understand it's not just about protection, it's about partnership. Silent, steadfast, and often more human than we are, Ghost's journey reminds us that love doesn't always come with promises sometimes. It simply shows up and stays. These dogs carry our burdens, guard our hearts, and ask for so little in return. They don't need us to be perfect, just present. If this story touched something in you, maybe it's time to go sit beside your dog for a while. And if you're looking for ways to connect deeper, there's a beautiful little guide I came across. It's not fancy, but it's heartfelt. It helped me see things through their eyes again. If you're curious, I'd be happy to point you to it. But no pressure, just when you're ready. Because sometimes the most healing thing we can do is listen.